Hello. Uh, Hope everyone can see and hear me and all that. It's kind of nice doing a solo hangout, I just realized, because I don't have to wear headphones. So I think I've worn headphones in every live stream I've ever done. So this is a nice holiday from that. But anyway, I'm here to interact with my chat, so I should probably take a look at that. What are we talking about? Oh, SRG, you finally saw I, Daniel Blake. Yeah, that movie is pretty heavy, but the situation that it's depicting is heavy. So Halloween H2O, yeah, not quite in the same caliber as I, Daniel Blake. It's yeah. The first Halloween is I think one of the greatest horror films ever made. And the stories about the about the set, there's some great stories about the set. Well, I could talk about that kind of stuff, right? I shouldn't get on a tangent. Oh, I haven't actually seen the film. So Ken Loach did a film called Land and Freedom. I haven't seen that. I should check that out. Yeah, it's common for films for British films with heavy regional accents to put subtitles on. The other left wing, because there's another, I don't know what's his goddamn name. I'm terrible with in the mornings. Uh, yeah, so another one of his films, Sweet 16, was in subtitles, like not just in its when it was at Cannes or film festivals, it was released that way in English speaking countries. Wait, Land and Freedom, that film, that's about the Spanish Civil War? Holy shit. How have I not seen this thing? I'm going to look it up. Huh. No shit. Yeah, so the videos from my old channel, I don't have most of them. In fact, I've got two on my computer, and they're not ones that anyone has ever asked to be uploaded. I'm sure people would watch them if I did, but they're not ones that are specific. There are quite a few videos that have been specifically asked for. They're not either of those. So I've got access to a couple that have been uploaded or that mirrored on other channels that I could, um, I could download them from YouTube and upload them that way. But there are also some that people I know have on their hard drives. In some cases, those are not people that I want to contact, so I don't really know how to. It's a bit of a dead end. So, yeah. Long story short, there's not many that are actually. I was a bit more hopeful when I first started the new channel that I'd be able to upload more, but it's not looking that good, to be honest. Anyway, the Pet Cemetery remake. Yeah, I had the opportunity to see that for free. And when I saw Us, and I turned that down because I was like, I'd rather just have the 2 hours of my life, like on balance. And also, um, after seeing a Jordan Peele film, it just seemed like, why put that, end on a high note in terms of going to movies. I do have a dog. She's actually at daycare today, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to do the live stream today. Because Kara, with the way that I frame things, she's never going to be in the shot because I'm basically like against my office wall, and she doesn't. Even if she has actually wandered in, and she's under the camera, you can't even see her. And so there's no like benefit to having her here, and she sometimes barks and stuff, and I've got to deal with that. So it's just a bit awkward. So it's better for me to do live streams on days where she's not here. When I was doing the hangout with SRG last time, she came home during that, and there was a whole thing. I had to mute my mic and all that. But yeah, I enjoyed Us. I didn't think Us was as good as Get Out, but on the flip side, Jordan Peele is his obviously his skill set is growing as a director. So in directorial terms, in some ways, it's more sophisticated than Get Out. There's a lot more subtext and metaphor and theme and stuff like that. Well, there's a lot the theme. Okay, there's a lot of theme in Get Out, but there's a lot of there's like just tons. It seems like that's the reason he made Us, in my opinion, is just because there's so much visual metaphor and subtext and mise en scène in the film that it seems like that's what he was exploring by doing it. I stopped going to the movies years ago. Yeah, well, I mean, I do go and see quite a lot because I'm in the film industry. I'm not going to go into detail, but I quite often get to see things without paying. So I go see quite a lot of stuff that way, and I do see other stuff that I don't get to see through that at the because I live in Miramar, which is like the sort of ground zero for the Wellington film industry. There's a cinema in Miramar, which is Miramar is like a sort of suburb quite far from town, and Wellington's not a massive city, so it's not normal to have a cinema in the suburbs. But because it's the film industry town, so yeah, I go see stuff down the road at the because it's so convenient. But sometimes they don't put things on. They haven't. They're not putting on. I don't think they're putting on the Hellboy remake. So, well, new adaptation of the Hellboy comics, I should say. Yeah, I do. So I may go all the way into town to see that, into the city. Or otherwise, if I don't see it through the industry, then I probably will just have to wait until it's online. I do really want to see it though, so yeah, I might make the effort. Peter Jackson. Well, I've met Peter Jackson, but I mean, that's not abnormal. If you're in the Wellington film industry, you probably met him at some point. My bragging rights one is that I've met Del Toro. I met Guillermo Del Toro, which is not that. I mean, he was here for quite a while, but they never shot anything, so he wasn't on set. So there wasn't that many people who actually met him. I just happened to basically run into him at a screening, so it was awesome, and he's incredibly funny. That was my takeaway. He was with his brother, and they were both incredibly funny. Terry Gilliam, I'm not a fan of. His politics are a bit cringy, and he's just not been making very good films at all in the last couple of decades. And he made a film called Tideland, which I think is like an abomination and terrible. Yeah, I shouldn't overplay that thing. I mean, I talked to Del Toro for about 45 seconds or a minute or something. It wasn't. I never meeting with him or anything. Like it wasn't a big deal. I was gonna play a couple of video games, but I'm not so sure now. I mean, the first one I was thinking of playing is Emperor, which is a Chinese imperial city building game from like 17 years ago or something. But I opened it up and it just there was some resolution issues. I think it would look too. I don't think it would look great on a sort of modern live stream. The other one I might still play. I'm not sure. I only started playing it yesterday, so I'm not very good at it, and it just seems a little. Um, it might be a little embarrassing. Like I would in my mind when I think about streaming a game, it's something that I know really well and can like play well, and like won't look like a moron when I'm doing it. But this game I was playing last night is pretty fun. So I don't know. It's what the hell? I can't even remember what it's called. It's a executive something. It's a RTS game, but it's also a first person game, and you are like the commander of a robot army and navy, and you like build a military through computer terminals. You can also run around your space station, and you can get into fighters and fly around and stuff. It's pretty cool. It's the sequel to a another RTS game that was not in space but on land. And so they've taken the same sort of concept they did on land and taken it into space. It's just an early access game at the moment, but the first one turned out pretty good. So, rumors about Gilliam's inappropriate behavior, possibly. I haven't actually heard of that, but that doesn't mean anything. There could well have been. It wouldn't surprise me because that film he made, Tideland, that it's creepy, man. It's did I get my namesake from the thief? My namesake is the Garrett family, who were a British English, specifically family of first wave feminists. There was Elizabeth Garrett Anderson, who was the first female doctor in England and the first female doctor in France. She went over to France for a while, and she also set up the first. She was the first woman to set up a medical school in England, and she taught female medical students. She was also the first woman to be a mayor in England, and also the first woman to sit on a school board. And then her younger sister was Millicent Garrett Fawcett, who was the sort of she led the group, the NUWSS, who were like the most responsible of any group in the first wave movement in Britain to get women the vote. She sort of spearheaded. There were a lot of different, factions trying to get women the vote in Britain, but they were the ones who like were successful, I guess, and they were the ones who stuck it out right to the end to get it done. Factorio, yeah, I've played Factorio. I enjoyed it, but I didn't. Like my cousin got deep into that game, and like it's one of those games that you can get real deep into, and it never got me that way, but I did. I thought it was really fun. Idols, nope, never heard of them. Getting Del Toro for his. Oh man, I would love to. A film industry podcast is something I could do, but it's those things are such a lot of work that I don't think I have the time for. Well, I mean, I could make the time for it, but all my other stuff would get pushed back a bit, and everything would take a bit longer, and everything kind of takes me a while. It seems at the moment anyway, so just want to kind of focus. I've got a video in the works at the moment. It's going pretty well. I've edited the first 5 minutes of the audio, and which is quicker than I thought I would. So, all right. What else do I want to talk about today? Oh, sorry, I totally missed that Lito is here. Hello. Always good to see you. Well, see isn't the right word, I guess, in my case. See things that you wrote. recently. I am well. Yeah. I didn't have time to wash my hair this morning. I normally wash my hair before live streams, and I didn't this time, and it was a bit. So that's a bit. Um, yeah, I don't think anyone cares but me, but it's one of those things, you know. So I've been running around this morning, which is a bit stressful, but other than that, yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. I find some left wing music a little bit cringy in some ways. I think for it like yeah, I don't know. It's hard to explain. I well for example, anarcho punk. There's some anarcho punk I really like, but there's also quite a lot of anarcho punk bands who don't have a like firm handle on anarchist theory. Yeah, you see, Crass. That's a classic example of the kind of band I'm talking about. They just like a lot of their lyrics. It's just like they don't really like. Okay, they made a song called "Is It Bloody Revolution," in which they denounce revolution as being violent. It's like kind of comes across like they'd never read any anarchist like writing, like because if they had, like, they'd know that you know the status quo is also violent and it's perpetual violence, whereas a revolution is short term violence that has a definite end. Yeah, I really didn't like that song, and it kind of put me off that band. Chumbawamba, I love, which anyone who's been watching the videos on my channel might know because I included one of their songs in a video, and I will be doing so again in future videos because they've made a lot of good stuff. There's a lot of stuff I love about Chumbawamba. Like for example, they well, for one thing, they um, had a go at being like successful, releasing singles that were designed to be like in the charts, and then they didn't like it, so they stopped being successful on purpose. Like it was like, it's not for us. I love that, and I also love that they wrote, is it an EP or an LP or something? They wrote a bunch of songs that to celebrate the death of Margaret Thatcher, and then like to be released upon her death. But then they split up as a band before she died. But when she died, they released it like post breakup anyway, just like which I thought was fun. Right, right. Okay, this Volstix is saying Cress had a lot of band members in period. Yeah, that's a good point. I do overlook things like that. The Cress house they've got some kind of housing co-op or something set up. That's pretty cool. I'm enjoying that. Yeah, the dumped ice water on a UK. Yeah, exactly. Black sheep. Nope, not heard of that. Yeah, I'm certainly always interested in learning about anarchist housing cooperatives and stuff. Yeah, I do. I think I'd heard that there was a documentary about Crass. I haven't seen it. Oh no, no, sorry. I was thinking about because I know there's a documentary about Chumbawamba, and I think I was thinking about them. Just reading about this film, Land and Freedom. Definitely looks interesting. Oh, he's joins. It's a British guy who joins Poom. So is it like a fictionalization of Orwell's experiences or something? Like, I mean, I'm sure there, for all I know, there were multiple British people who joined Poom. I don't know. Pound Poom. On the subjects of recent film, though, the I haven't seen that many this year yet. I mean, it's still early days in terms of the sort of schedule release schedule for most movies. Um, but my favorite that I've seen so far this year is the boy who would be king, the kid who would be king. Hold on, the kid who would be king. Yeah, um, I thought that was brilliant. I saw a critic saying that it falls just short of being enchanting, but it's like really watchable and really entertaining. Um, yeah, maybe I don't know, but it's still really brilliant. Oh, local Christchurch punk band. Oh yeah, that's something that we'll probably talk about at some point. That Christchurch thing. Not right now. Maybe a little bit later. Yes, Volsticks. That is my understanding. Is that Perm weren't great towards the anarchists. I I am actually not that well read on the intricacies of that sort of stuff, though. Yeah, see, I own that book, the Bookchin's book about the Spanish Civil War. I haven't actually read it yet, though, even though it's really short. I'll get to it. I've read a couple of books about the Spanish Civil War, but they're a bit grand. Well, one of them was a bit grander in its view than that and didn't really get down to things at that level. And the other one was more granular from the sort of ground up about the foreign battalion, the foreign volunteers. Yeah, yeah. People tend to speak highly of the book. I know it's on Anarcho-Pax anarchist reading list. I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly. Oh, right. Yeah, no, I wasn't including when I said I haven't watched many films this year, I was just talking about 2019 theatrical releases. I've seen a bunch of stuff from 2018 that slipped me by that year, and last year. That's mainly what I've been watching so far. Part of that is because 2019 hasn't been a great year for movies so far. Quite a few duds have come out. Anarcho-Pax anarchist reading list is how do I find a link to that? I might have it bookmarked. I think I do. I'm pretty bad at remembering to bookmark stuff. No, I don't think I have. But I should be able to find it pretty easily, I think. It's a WordPress document. Yeah, here it is. Oh, this is the wrong reading list. This is the anti-racism reading list. Here it is. I'll um I'll add it to the description. Do do do. Okay. Hex anarchist reading list. All right, done. Okay, so it's in the description now. Oh, crap, I misspelled anarcho pack in my haste to add it to the description. Let me just, see, this is why you don't rush, because it ends up taking longer in the long run. All right. I haven't read Peter Marshall's Demanding the Impossible, so I'm not sure. Not sure. Yeah, I agree, Volstix. I tend to buy quite a lot of physical copies of anarchist literature. Even if I'm more likely to read it electronically, which is in some cases true. Although with my anarchist book club series, I have to mark those up, so I always use the physical copies of those just because it's more convenient to for that specific style of going through a book. But so actually, when it comes to the AK Press stuff, I am more likely to read the physical copy anyway. But even if I wasn't, I still would buy them just because I agree, supporting those kinds of things is important. That's why I buy a lot of stuff from the IWW, like this flag and that that General Strike Russian thing just came free with something I bought. It came free with the General Strike mug that I have. Um, yeah, I buy a lot of that stuff just because I don't know. I think IWW's dues are are pretty reasonable, and I feel like some months, I can contribute more. So it's just a way to do that. What do I think of the use of markets? That's like, yeah, that kind of market anarchism stuff. The way I see it is that any future anarchist society that exists on the level of like an entire country will have lots of variation in little different experiments and stuff. And I imagine quite a lot of those experiments will involve markets. And I'd be interested to see, although I probably won't live to see it. Stop being a pessimist. I would really like to see what happens with that, how that goes. Personally, that's not what I advocate, but in a truly free anarchist society, those kinds of experiments would be going on, and I would be interested to see how they went. I'm not going to just write them off as being, a terrible idea or whatever. I'd be interested to see how it goes. Yeah, I don't know anything about the anarchist scene on Reddit. I don't really go on Reddit these days much. I've got a really I don't know what's really old. I've got a pretty old Reddit account. It's 9 years old. Um, but yeah, I don't go on it that much. I don't know. I'm sure Reddit's fine these days, but I don't know. I just remember there was a time when it was really quite fairly left wing, and it just sort of slowly got more and more react. No, I wouldn't say taken over by reactionaries, but there were more and more reactionaries to the point where every fucking comment section became a big giant argument about all kinds of. It just got really tiring. As long as people's survival isn't tied to them, yeah, I think that sort of stuff is key. Like for example, in anarcho syndicalism. Well, I mean, there's different models for it. I'm not the whatever I suggest isn't the be all and end all of syndicalist ideas. There's all kinds of different ways it could be set up, but the pretty common theoretically common way to do it, and to popular, I should say, is to have it where so you don't need to work in order to gain all the things that you need to live and gain a decent reasonable amount of random, consumer goods stuff that you'd buy in a capitalist society, and with the added benefit of the fact that copyright doesn't matter anymore. So you could just make PlayStations, just backward engineer them and just mass produce them, and then Sony would be like, "Hey, what are you doing?" And like, "What are you gonna do about it? Fuck you." That I love that. And also like, but anyway, I'm off topic. You don't need to work to survive, but if you like, so for example, if you're in the like food service syndicate, and that's sort of the area you're in, either as a chef or a whatever, food cart vendor, whatever, you don't have to actually be doing that to get all your needs met through the syndicates, but if you do, you might get access to things that above and beyond, as a reward for actually bothering to like set up a takeaway store or whatever, because the community needs that stuff. So you do need some level of extra reciprocation or whatever above what everyone gets to survive and to like entertain themselves and all that. But it's not a wealth divide. It's not tangible. It's in terms of like, they're like living in hog heaven or whatever. It's just a little bit, it's just a recognition. Yeah, I was thinking about that console thing, because one of the things you think about in terms of the anarchist economy is where is some stuff going to come from. So for example, in New Zealand, we don't produce all the like minerals and metals and things that we need to produce. If we were switching to a system where we were, rather than importing through the global capitalist system, importing consumer products, we were switching from one where we make them ourselves. You still need to be able to do that. You need the raw materials, and I was just thinking about all that stuff and how that might work. And there's a bunch of different ideas for how that might work, but one of the things I was thinking about is reverse engineering popular products and just mass producing them and being like, what are you going to do? LSR is Libertarian Socialist Rants. Cameron, good chat. We don't talk much because we don't run in the same circles generally, but I respect him. Oh, there's a Graeber book I haven't read. I have to note that one down. I like Graeber. Oh, hey, unknown email. It's been a while. we should catch up sometime. I do I did go on I do occasionally check out the BreadTube subreddit. Not very often. It doesn't seem that active. It's active. I don't know what the right dynamic. I don't know. Interest. It didn't grab me as a thing to use a lot. I do check it out every so often. Why did I leave for so long? Well, I got burned out on talking about politics. And well, not burned out. I My way of talking about politics was changing at the time and getting more negative, and I was worried about what that might mean and what it might when you're doing stuff in public and stuff. You got to be a bit concerned about the ramifications. Might, even if you're small like me, it still matters. Even if it affects one person, it matters. And so I don't know. I just got a bit. I thought it was irresponsible to keep going the way I was, and I just felt that was the only way I was able to talk about politics at the time. So I just stopped doing it. Started talking about other stuff on YouTube. And then it got to the point where things in the world were so bad that I felt it was irresponsible not to. Um, and I got to the point where I was a bit less pessimistic about things, and not just gonna like pour shit all over everyone's time in terms of talking about. I still do a bit of it, to be honest with you, but yeah, I don't. It's not. I'm okay with it. It's not to the level it was going to be at when I quit the first time. So yeah, I got to the point where I thought, it's people like me who know a bit of anarchist theory and know how to make videos on YouTube and microphones and lights and cameras and things. That it's my. I mean, if it's not people like me who are going to be putting the information out there, who is, So I basically got to that point where I was like, I have to, I want to be able to look back when I'm old and decrepit and on my deathbed and think, at least I tried to do something. At least I spent my time making an effort to try and get the information out there. Titirangi, yeah, it is a nice place. And 95 BFM is a good radio station. Left Unity, yes, I don't like Left Unity. I think it's dumb and dangerous. Well, it depends. In real life activism, local activism, where you're working with the people near you, I would do whatever to get stuff done because you just kind of have to put shit aside in that context. But on the internet, where our job is spreading information and putting, political philosophy stuff out there, I don't think it makes any sense at all to propose unity with people that in a revolutionary situation we would be killing each other. I don't think it. Will I and Kevin Logan ever collaborate again? Probably not, because I'm probably not going to do collaborations with anybody. It's I've tried to do them. It's a lot of sort of logistical stuff that I'm not good at. Back and forward. If I knew a YouTuber who lived in Wellington and we could like physically do something, that would be easier. But over the internet with different time zones, I just find it all a bit sort of annoying. It gets in the way. I'm not going to talk about the Peter Coffin thing. I don't want to spend this time talking about YouTube drama. I think it's all a bit pointless. My thing is I'm just going to make YouTube videos, put information out there that I think is useful, and leave it at that, basically. Yeah, to be honest, like Volstix is just thinking about no local anarchists. I have that issue too. There are anarchists in Wellington. There's a whole movement, but the majority of leftists in where the city I live in are state socialists. Marxists. They talk about the reserve army of labor a lot and stuff like that. Well, I'm not mocking that concept. It's a totally valid concept, but they talk in Marxist jargon a lot. There's a lot of Trotskyists. Yeah, trots. Yeah. Yeah, I do the same thing, and I talk to them about anarchism, and it not to. I don't think I've got any hope of like converting them to anarchism, but just because they don't know anything about it. When I talk to them, they're like, "Oh, what's that?" And I actually just like they know that it's a thing, and that like a lot of people in anti-fascist organizing are anarchists, for example. They know, well, like they know that I heard one of them say that on the Antifa flag, how it's black and red, that the red is state socialism and the black is libertarian socialism. And they know that, but they don't know anything more than that, really. So I was just giving them some basic information. I was telling them about the IWW and stuff like that. Well, I'm never going to be an Antifa super soldier bunny in the box, but with the political climate the way it is in my country these days, there's a lot of people getting involved in anti-fascism. Let me tell you that. Um, let's just leave it at that. Yes, the CPGB is like you can't. I mean, I'm sure there are worse state socialist organizations out there, but they're one of the worst. They're like, yes, I know an email. I do think there is too much historical fetishism, but I do think at the same time that in the anarchist movement generally, there's a knowledge of the negative aspect of associating yourself too much with an actual person, a thinker. Like, like the term Marxist Leninist, it's associated with specific individual thinkers. And, I was in a Thought Slime live stream yesterday, and it was in the chat for it. And one of the people asked TS what he thought about how there's some people who called themselves Kropotkinists in the early 20th century or whatever, and what he thought of that. And I said the same thing he did, which is that that's a bit non-anarchist, that it doesn't really have an anarchist feel to it to do that. So I do think in the anarchist movement we probably are a little bit less prone to that kind of fetishism. It depends what you mean by fetishism. Like if you might not be just talking about just individuals, thinkers. I do think that. I mean, I'm guilty of going on about the First International split a lot, just because I am annoyed about how the left wing movement basically got derailed in the 1800 mid 1800s and hasn't really ever recovered from that. How are things? Have they calmed down? Well, I'm pretty glad personally that the rest of the world stopped talking about it, because that was a bit much. But New Zealand will never stop talking about it. I think we've never had anything like what happen here. We've had a few terror incidents. I can think of 3, and every single one of them happened in Wellington, where I live. There's probably ones in Auckland. Auckland's a bigger city, so there's probably been stuff there too. I don't know about it though. But I can think that, for example, in 1931, there was a Chinatown in Wellington. It's not there anymore. This is why it's not there anymore, is because one night, or no, it was during the day, it was either a day market or a night market. There was a market going on in the Chinatown at the time. And there was like during market day or night, whatever, they would have they'd be selling food, on the street, and there was a lot of people around, and this drunken bigot wandered into the Chinatown with a rifle and shot some people. He killed one person, and that basically the government at that point were like, maybe it's not a good idea to encourage ethnic minorities to cluster together in one place. So they basically resettled the people in Chinatown to different areas and spread the Chinese community out, which is, it's a shame. I can see why they did that, but at the same time, those photos of the old Chinatown are pretty cool, and those markets looked awesome, and I miss that. It'd be kind of nice. But it's cool to you can go there to those streets that used to be the Chinatown, and, walk around and see the the remnants of it and stuff. It's kind of historian's treat. So there was that incident. There was an incident in 1981, 50 years later. Was it no 19? It was in the early 1980s. Sorry, I don't think it actually was 1981. It was in the early 80s anyway. When there was a building called the Trade Union House, I believe it's called. No, Trades Hall. It's a trade union building, yeah, called Trades Hall. It was bombed. I can't remember the details. It wasn't like a corporate like terror thing, anti-trade unionist thing. It was a disgruntled. I think it was a worker who did it. It was disgruntled anti-union worker or something. I can't remember the details, but one person died again. And they were a janitor, just a worker, not a union official of any kind. Yeah. And the only other one is a state terror incident where the French government bombed a boat, a Greenpeace boat called the Rainbow Warrior that was docked in Wellington. They blew it up because the Rainbow Warrior was involved in protests against French nuclear testing. And there was a photographic journalist on board, and he died. So each of the three things I know of, there was one casualty, and this one had 50. So it's like a whole different thing. And yeah, I think it changed this country forever. That's my prediction, is that I don't think we'll ever be the same. Yeah, I'm sure anarchists do it. I'm not saying that we don't. I'm sure I've done it. In fact, I used to do it when I was, because I've been an anarchist on and on. Like, there was a period where I went back to liberalism, but I was an anarchist for years in my 20s. And I don't think I actually ever actually called myself like a Chomskyite, but I kind of thought of myself that way in my head. Um, yeah, and I, looking back at it now, realize that that was stupid. Part of the reason I did that is because at that time I hadn't seen. It was basically like, because I became a Buddhist because I was reading a lot of Buddhist literature, and I didn't read anything I didn't like. Basically, well, the stuff. It's non-dogmatic as a religion. You don't have to believe everything in order to be. You don't have to believe every little. Um, like in Christianity, you have to buy into a whole lot of like weird stuff in order to like be. But in Buddhism, as long as you adhere to the sort of moral aspect of it, the ethical aspect of it, and treat people well, and treat yourself well, so you don't turn into someone who is a negative person. Then you can kind of believe or not believe whatever you want. Like really irrational belief is obviously discouraged, but yeah, it's not dogmatic in that same way. So like when I read that, and I was like, oh, okay. And then I read more and more stuff I liked. I basically got to the point where I didn't have any argument against it. So I thought, well, why not become this? Because if I don't have any way to argue against what it's saying, then but that's basically how I became a Buddhist anyway. And I think because I was that was a year before I became an anarchist, or maybe it was the other way around. I can't. Anyway, around that time, anyway, that was sort of how I was looking at ideology. And I think when I became an anarchist, it was the same thing with Chomsky. Like I liked everything I was reading. Of course, these days Chomsky has said a few cringy things because he's getting on a bit, and he's a bit out of touch with the way the left is and where things are in the world today. But at that time, that was before that, and I hadn't read anything like that. So I was just someone who didn't have any arguments against Chomsky. So I just more and more associated myself with him, and through that with Rocker, because Chomsky's a big fan of Rocker, and sort of a lot of the stuff he writes is just stuff he's quoting from Rocker, who in a weird, Rocker's also referencing things written by earlier anarcho-syndicalist thinkers, mostly French guys. So he's like, it's like a guy repeating the words of a guy who was repeating the ideas of other guys. So I was an anarchist from about 2003 or 2 through to 2008. When Barack Obama became president. Weirdly enough, that was what drove me back to liberalism. Well, no, I didn't. I drifted slowly over the course of like maybe a couple of years to the point where I was basically a liberal again, like a proper liberal with a bunch of stupid ideas in my head about the government and stuff. And I do have a few holdovers from that. Like I'm still like I worked at the my country's tax department during that period, and I still am very much in favor of like I'm not. Well, I mean, left libertarianism in general is not like right libertarianism with its obsession with taxation and all that stuff. But I'm very much pro tax and like it. I despise like the when I was working at the IRD, the Inland Revenue people, there was a big case going on at that time where the government was taking the 5 biggest banks in the country to court for tax evasion, and they won every case, and it was a big deal. And I celebrated that like hard out. Like I was like, but that was very, very cool. My lawn is being mowed right now. Is that holy crap? That's probably really loud. What do I do? What do I do? Can people hear it? Maybe I'll just turn the volume of my mic down a bit or something, or I don't know. I'm a bit stumped. Okay, sweet. Well, that makes me feel better about it. They've done the area right outside the window anyway, so anyway, so yeah, so in 2008, 2009, 2010, I sort of was back to being a liberal, and then from that period till the Trump election, I was a liberal, with anarchist and specifically anarcho-syndicalist sympathies for sure. But yeah, then the Trump thing happened, and I went more and more further left. Like, well, basically the day after the election, I was already calling myself an anarchist again. So, Stephen Lawrence, is that? I hope I don't not sound insensitive here, but I'm not. Is that? Was he murdered? Was he a gay guy who was murdered? I I think I know what you're referring to, but Smedley Butler. He was the wasn't he the military commander who was supposed to lead the fascist takeover of the U.S. government in the 1930s, and instead of doing that, he sold out the corporate financiers who were backing it. Oh, he was a black man. Sorry, right. Right. Oh, yes. I do remember now. I remember Corbyn giving a speech about it. Yeah. Oh, really? Oh, yes, actually. I do remember seeing that. Yeah. On the subject of Kaiserreich, I know I shouldn't be hard on the devs of Kaiserreich for not having updated it to the current version of Hearts of Iron 4 yet. I mean, they're not getting paid; they're just doing it totally for the love of it. But at the same time, I really want to play Kaiserreich with the new version of Hearts of Iron 4. I just have it back. I have it where you reset it back to a previous state, and I'm just playing 1.5.4, so I can play Kaiserreich, because Hearts of Iron 4 on its own just doesn't have a lot of interest for me anymore. Basically, the moment I even knew Kaiserreich existed, I was like, well, I'm done with Hearts of Iron 4 vanilla now. Like, why the hell would I play that? And it's not just because of the syndicalist thing. It's deeper than Hearts of Iron 4 in a lot of ways. On the subject of Paradox, I am pretty excited for Rome Imperator, I've got to say. That idea of combining aspects of the different... It's got influences in there from pretty much all of their franchises. It's got definite Europa Universalis influences, obviously. It's got Stellaris influences, I'd say. It's definitely got Hearts of Iron influences. So yeah, I'm really interested to see how it comes out. Yeah, I'm not that well versed on the history of like British policing and stuff. I know a bit about in Australia and New Zealand, but I kind of fell out of favor with Stellaris, to be honest with you, Terry. I think that some of the changes they made to it over time made it went like negative. I think it suffered from a bit of feature creep or something. Like I didn't like they changed they decreased the size when you take a new star. The size of the territory around the star that you get got shrunk a lot. And there's a reason they did that, and it kind of makes sense from a logical point of view, but I just I don't really like it. And the other thing was then you had to build like a station, a space station in the orbit of the sun of a system to of every system in your and that I just found that a bit tedious as well. And I don't know, like I don't know. It's still good, but yes, unknown email. You can rest assured that whenever I play a Kaiserreich, I am playing as the radical socialists, the ones who want to. Well, some of the it depends. Some of the syndicalist societies qualify as anarcho-syndicalist, but a lot of them don't. They're more state syndicalist. So like getting rid of that shit is like my top priority, and for that reason, I kind of wish I could play like Britain and France at the same time. Because what normally happens is I play as like Union of Britain, and I go radical socialist and go the like decentralization route and all that. And then as I'm doing that, France becomes totalist and like gets taken over by like lunatic, like central hardcore totalitarian centralists. It's like, damn, I wish I could just do both. Yeah, that was another change I wasn't a big fan of, to be honest. The in Stellaris, how they changed it from how you could choose the different. I know again, I understand why because of a balancing thing, but I kind of preferred it where you could just choose. Yeah, see, that's what I love about playing as Union of Britain and Kaiserreich is that you play as the Welsh guy and he decentralized. He finally frees Wales. It's great. I see. I've never played a Paradox game online. I never played it multiplayer. It was like that pause button. That I live for that pause button. I don't know how I would manage without it. Solaris, great film. Well, the original Tarkovsky one. I'm not so sure about that remake, the American remake. I don't think I think maybe I did see it when it came out, but I I don't think I saw it. It does have pause, and how does that work? Do you just have to all agree to it or something? Or yeah, I didn't hear people like crushing the remake. I think people were pretty happy with it, so I just didn't watch it. Or if I did, I don't remember watching it, which is very possible. I watched a lot of stuff when I was younger. I was consuming just absurd amounts of like movies when I was a kid. Back in the video store days, used to go and they had deal to get 10 video 7-day videos, weekly videos. I just do that every week. But I watched a lot of movies. See, that's part. I admit that is part of why I don't like the totalists, is because they're all fucking fascists. You know, they end up in that movement, and they don't know that, of course, because they're in that timeline. But we do. You fuck mostly in Mussolini. Hey Raven, can you not like attack people for being fans of particular YouTubers? It's I don't want that kind of stuff. I mean, unless they're like Nazis or something, go ahead, of course. But you know, like liberals and stuff, whatever. I watched a couple liberals. I watched Steve Shives. It was a quite a fairly long period where I wasn't watching Steve Shives because I got a bit annoyed with him because he kept using the word anarchy to describe like a chaotic society, and I told him off for it. And he was like, "Oh yeah, no, I know I shouldn't do that." And then he did it again, and I was like, "Damn it!" But then you know, I'm over that now. I'm not going to hold that against someone forever. Yeah, I'm going to be aping his trick actually videos pretty soon. The video I'm doing right now is something else, and then I might do another different video. I've got a video I want to do on vaccinations about how someone asked me about how vaccinations might work in an anarchist society where there's no state to do them, and I think it's an interesting subject to talk about because it's an interesting way to talk about how that kind of thing, like mandatory things, would work in an anarchist society. And my video will be about an anarcho-syndicalist societies, you know, how an anarcho-syndicalist society might approach the subject, the issue of vaccinations, because that's what my area of knowledge is. So like I would feel weird to me to like speak for like what an ANCOM version might look like because it's just not my area, and it should be left to someone who is an ANCOM and has been for a decent length of time, so can confidently say that. Yeah, I mean, I haven't been following his politics, Adam, so I'm not really sure if he's a liberal or not. I mean, I kind of feel the same way to a degree about liberals as I do about sort of generic leftism. Like that generic leftism kind of annoys me. Like the sort of version of leftism where you know, like Sean or Philosophy Tube. I mean, I like those YouTubers. Don't get me wrong; they make good videos, and I watch them. But like, it irks me kind of how they're like. There's a similar thing to liberals, where liberals will often be able to diagnose social problems, but they won't like propose workable solutions to those problems. Like, this is something that I often bring up about the show last week tonight, is that he's good at bringing up a problem and you know focusing attention on a problem, but then there's no bit at the end where it's like, and this is how we fix it, because I guess he just doesn't know, doesn't have any ideas, whatever. I find the same thing often with the sort of generic leftism crowd, that where they're like, you know, this is what's bad, and it's like, okay, great, what's good, what works? You know, I know capitalism's bad. How do we make a society, a workable society without it? What's the plan? You know, that bit doesn't seem to come. And the reason I'm sort of against that stuff, even despite being fans of all those people, is because that's what I'm on YouTube for these days. Is because that's the bit that is missing that I think needs to be said. Is here's how we actually do it. That's what I like about anarcho syndicalism. It's got a plan. It's got a here's how you do it. It's got a solid, workable system where as long as you have enough people in the trade unions, which is the build-up part, what anarcho-pack would call the evolution phase of socialism, which, the pre-revolutionary phase. Okay, someone's. Yeah, bye-bye. Yeah, if you come to someone's live stream to call them names, what's wrong with you? Why are you doing spending your time that way? Is your time worthless? Like, I don't understand that. Yeah, see, that's why I don't dislike those YouTubers, is because, well, they, apart from the fact that I am entertained by their videos, I they drive people leftwards, and that's always good. But they need to be funneled into away from just genericism into something real, into something with an actual plan and with like actual ideas and stuff. So, yeah. Yeah, no, I know like a lot of people in who would watch something made by me or something made by Thought Slime or whatever, they do end up being in that, getting access to that stuff, being shown that stuff through being a fan of someone like H Bomb, and that's why I love those people. At the same time, though, I do think that there is a little bit of a like popularity contest aspect to it, and like I find that the bigger YouTubers will sort of gravitate around each other, and like the smaller YouTubers don't get in on that. Even if like we're friends with the big ones, we don't get the invite to like do a collab or anything like that. And I think the reason for that is partly financial. Like if Ollie Philosophy Tube is going to do a collab with someone, it's in his financial interest to do it with someone who's well known. It'll get more views that way. And I do find that slightly, I don't know, I don't like it much, but at the same time, people got to make money. That's the society we live in. So, and Ollie and Harry, none of those people are rich. They're just workers like you and me. They haven't got any more resources than any of us. They're not elites, so I've got no real problem with it at the end of the day. When it comes right down to it, yeah, I haven't actually seen Ollie's series about liberalism, but I think Anarcho Pack watched it and said that she thought it was good. So, I'm sure it is. Yeah, I think aside from the fact that it's the color grading isn't great, I think that video that Thought Slime made about the state is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Yeah, there's a story behind why H Brummer guy wasn't in that live stream, and I'm not going to get into it here. But let's just say no, there is no chance of me and H Brummer guy doing a stream together. Well, in terms of the plan, like model for anarcho-syndicalism, the best thing to do is look at the Catalonians. However, that only tells you some things. They didn't get a chance to show a peacetime version of that society. But we can make guesses based on how they were in wartime. Um, they would have been a very industrial society, I'd say. Um, they would have been able to produce, all the kinds of goods that the people would have needed or wanted. And I think it would have been awesome, but we didn't get a chance to see that. But yeah, you can certainly get a really good grasp on the pre-revolutionary phase, which is something I talk about in my my rocker series of videos, where I go into how the anarcho-syndicalist theorists wrote about how the unions should spread radical socialist education around among the workers through the apparatus of the trade unions. And oh shit, Adam, that sounds serious. Holy crap, that you should probably deal with that. Wow. Anyway, skip. So anyway, so they said, and that the trade unions would be a good system mechanism for spreading radical socialist education around because of the strike actions, because of the things they get up to, where the workers, the willingness of the average person to hear radical ideas drastically increases when they're involved in something like a strike, especially if it's a successful strike. And so that was the theory, is that this would work really well if you use the trade unions and strike actions to help spread socialist ideas around. And then the Catalonians came along and basically proved it. They said, look, it does work. We've done it. So even though, like I say in the rocker videos, like even though they didn't win the war, that stuff doesn't have any bearing on the pre-revolutionary phase, certainly. And you can see a really successful model for how to radicalize large amounts of workers leftwards, and specifically towards anarchism, through trade unions. And just that's what I guess I'd say. There is other ways you can get access to sort of ideas about how models might work in anarcho-syndicalism, but there's not everything is there. See, one of the things I wanted to talk about is one of the things about anarchist theory that's a bit different. I mean, I got to make it clear up front. I'm not like massively well read on political philosophy outside of anarchism. And even in anarchism, I'm still learning, still reading. Part of the reason I want to do Anarchist Book Club is because I get to learn a lot of stuff while I'm doing it, yeah, so I'm not saying I'm an expert on the things I'm about to be comparing anarchist theory to, but it does seem to me as a trend that in other kinds of political philosophy, they're a bit more explicit and specific about certain things, like ideas about how a justice system might work in under this kind of society, or how the economy might work in very specific details and stuff. And you don't really get that as much in anarchist theory. It's a bit more general. And the reason for that is because they're anti-authoritarians, the people writing it. Their job isn't to tell their people exactly how to do things, or spell it out to them and command them to do it exactly this way. It's to give them sort of general ideas and prompt them to thought about how anarchism might work in their society and their culture. And the point of it is not to step on people's toes about how they should run things. It's to give them a sort of framework of what not to do, and kind of here's some ideas for what might work and things like that. And within that framework, you sort of set up how you want to do it. And some people find that frustrating. Some people find it annoying how there's not, because they want specific ideas for how things might work so they can understand it better in their heads. And that's totally a fair thing to think and say. So one of the things I think is the purpose of, could be the purpose of like YouTube anarchism, is to put some ideas forward for that stuff. Channels like Non-Compete, Non-Compete did a video about anarchist police, what anarchist police might work. And police isn't quite the right word, obviously. It wouldn't be police in the sense we know it, but you could say anarchist justice system, because there would be a justice system. It wouldn't be a criminal justice system, but there would be something. It's not like, it's just not going to be like serial child rapists running around the streets just doing whatever the fuck they want. But when you say that and you say, oh, it'll be different, people go, well, what does that mean? How will it be different? What will it look like? And people want specific ideas, and that's totally fair. So I think that's one of the things that we YouTube people can do, is to be like, look, here's an idea for how this might work. So that's one of the things I want to do with the vaccination video, is be like, because the vaccination video goes into like how an anarcho-syndicalist education system might work. And how in some ways is actually not that different from the way we do it. but in other ways is massively different. So it, like, yeah, it's a mass education system. So the like basic idea behind it is similar to the liberal education system. You want to like compulsory. Well, actually, an anarchist education system wouldn't be compulsory. There would be tools to help people homeschool and things because every kid's different. Every kid needs a different learning environment. So there will be children who compulsory isn't the right word, but a system where anyone could, like the whole society could theoretically join if they wanted to. It has the capacity to handle that. So it has to be a mass system. It has to be a huge system with a lot of infrastructure and stuff. And so like it would be going into that, not into massive amounts of detail, obviously, because it's about vaccination. It's not about like, here's how they teach sociology or whatever. Like it's not about that. But it would go into how that might work because you need to talk about that a bit to talk about vaccinations. I gotta say, Adam, this whole situation sounds very off. This sounds very sketchy, and I would be creeped out as well. I haven't read that specifically about Norway cops, Volsticks, but it wouldn't surprise me. I've never heard of Project Cybersyn. Don't know what that is. Well, here's my take on how cars might be handled in a syndicalist society, for example, because I know an email brought up cars. So I think because automation, basically one of the things that an anarcho-syndicalist society should be doing on a big scale, especially in peacetime, is mass automation, is trying to automate as many jobs as humanly possible. So that you're not putting, so there's less pressure on workers to go into those fields if they don't want to, especially the jobs that are considered that they're just things that just need to be done, like rubbish collection and things. Although, one thing I will say about rubbish collectors is that they have an image of that they all hate their job and they're all miserable and it's horrible work. But actually, if you actually talk to them, they're actually really happy people who are like, they're actually not like that. That's a bit of a misconception, I think. But anyway, that's off topic. You want to automate as much as possible, and so I think self-driving cars would be incredibly important. They wouldn't be developed by some fucking shady Silicon Valley corporation on the other side of the world, but a system like that would be a good idea. And I think car ownership itself would be gotten rid of, and you'd have a system. You could have a system where all the cars are basically just driving around, and you have your phone, and you like have an app on your phone where you go like, I need a pickup, and the car in the area just stops at your house, and then you get in, and then it drives itself around till you tell it where to go. You don't have to find a park. You don't have to have a garage in your house where you store a car. It just frees up space in the people's homes and on their property, and also gets away with the need to have car parks in town. It's just a sort of all around good idea. So that is a potential way that you could do cars in a syndicalist society, I think. Oh, it's an Allende thing, Cybersyn, right? Yeah, well, I do think because that is one of the like for the real futurists in the anarchist movement who are projecting long into the future. One of the models that people talk about is the culture, from the Ian M. Banks novels, where everything's run by AI. I think could work. You have to be really confident about that AI, but yeah, it could work. And I think possibly it might be the only way to run a truly like properly utopian society like the culture is. Well, when I say Terry is just saying there are people who like cars and playing with them. Yeah, sure. What I'm when I say car ownership, like getting rid of car ownership, I don't mean like as a law. I mean like as the norm. You could still own one if you wanted to, I suppose. Like if you wanted to have a garage on your property, and you could, I think if you're going to have a mass self-driving system, that has to be compulsory, but that doesn't mean, off-road areas. You could still have racing and things like that. So that stuff, would still be totally possible. Yeah, when an anarchist society, apart from like, coercive hierarchies themselves, those, that's compulsory. That's a rule. You need to get rid of that. But in terms of like stuff like, yeah, individual car ownership and a mass automated self-driving system, you could do that. That's not a problem. That's one of the things about laws. That's why we don't like laws, is because if you look at the way laws are applied, in the theory about them is bad and the practice is bad in different ways. The theory is that they're supposed to apply to everyone in a uniform way. Everyone gets the same treatment, right? Now, in theory, that kind of sounds good until you actually think about it. Because should the law apply to everyone evenly in the same exact way, or maybe should things be looked at on a case-by-case basis? If you think about it, the reason why it's treated the same way thing came into it isn't because of some ethical dream where that was the goal. It was because it's bureaucratic, and in a bureaucratic system, you need that. You can't have people thinking for themselves and doing case-by-case scenarios in bureaucracy. You need to have uniform systems where everything's done the same. And the criminal justice system is incredibly bureaucratic in that way. Yeah, and so I think you need to get rid of that for that reason. But also in practice, the laws don't apply to everyone in the same way. The elites don't get the same treatment. That the laws really are there to be enforced on the plebs, the everyday folk. They're not there to restrict the activities of the rich and powerful. And you can see that clearly, That judge said about Paul Manafort, aside from the crimes you've done, you're an upstanding citizen. It's like, no, he's not. Well, even if he was, that's a bizarre thing to say, but that's not the case. He went around the world supporting some of the worst dictators on the planet and doing horrible propaganda for them and stuff. Like, he was a terrible person, but because he's rich and among the elite, if that was a black kid who stuck up a fucking convenience store with a knife or something, they would judge wouldn't say that to him. It'd probably be more true for him, In fact, it would be a lot more true, most likely. But that's just how it works. So both in terms of the theory of that they should apply in a uniform way, laws are bad, and also in the practice of how they're not done that way, they're also bad. And when you're constructing a system of rules that you want to, so you want to have an ordered society that is sophisticated and works in the way you want it to, you're going to have some rules, but laws, that's not a good model. That's a terrible model. And so when you're thinking about how your rule system might work, basically not laws is a good way to start. How do laws do it? Do it a different way. That's basically the rough guideline of how to set one up. And so there's different ideas for this transformative justice and restorative justice and things. And, one of the things I've kind of stopped doing it, but I was active for a while with the prison abolition movement in this country. And since Christchurch, I've kind of been doing other things, but that movement, one of the things they talk about is how if you think about a colonial country like New Zealand, well, there were Māori here before the Europeans turned up, and Māori didn't have prisons, so how did they handle it? The first time a Māori person was ever heard of the concept of a prison was when the European settlers turned up. They were the ones who brought the concept of prisons to this country. They didn't have prisons before that. And so if you think about, how did they do dispute resolution between the people? How did they handle that? If you look into that and you look into societies like that around the world that had a different system, there's a lot of great ideas there that could actually be applied really well to an anarchist society. I don't think they could be applied at all well to a centralized bureaucratic system like we have now, like liberal democracy is. They wouldn't work for that. In liberal democracy, you kind of need to imprison people. That's part of why it's bad. But you need to have a prison system, but in a decentralized, federalized, localized system like anarchism, those native cultures around the world, they have some really good ideas that we could learn a lot from. Well, banishment is one that was pretty common, and that could potentially work in some ways in an anarchist system, but it also probably wouldn't. So that's like one of the things that worked in the past, but probably wouldn't, but work now. But there are other ways, like Maori, for example. They had this system where they. Oh, is that what you were? No, I don't think they. Well, they might have done a decent amount of both those things for all I know. But what the prison abolitionists talk about is how they go into detail about the system the Maoris had, where they just talked things through, and and there would be times where the person would kind of be shunned in society, ostracized in practice, which is not at all like being in prison, because you could just go around town and conduct your affairs as normal, but it's just a bit like social ostracization and stuff. But yeah, there was a bunch of ideas anyway. They had a bunch of different approaches. Yeah, see, that is, yeah, someone's brought up Graeber. Exactly. Yeah, that's why Graeber's an important anarchist writer, is that he has a lot of knowledge about that stuff, and he's got a lot of, he can tell you about their ideas. Yeah, well, yeah, Terry's just talking about the poaching fish thing. Yeah, I'm just in response to that. I saw a thing on social media recently where there's comparing a white person's crime and punishment to a black person's crime and punishment, and all the black person had done was a woman who accidentally voted in a non-legal fashion. She'd done it unknowingly, and they put her in jail for like 60 days or something. And this other person was like a white person who'd done sexual assault or something, and had gotten no prison time. Yeah, I guess that's another great example of how laws are not actually enforced in a universal way. It's not just elites that get special treatment. It's different, like minority groups, whole massive groups that just have a in practice treated differently, with higher rates of conviction for the same offense, and higher prison sentences. Nuremberg trials. I don't know. Probably not. I'm not that interested in that. Yeah, Eichmann. See, I didn't really like that book. The Eichmann book. Wasn't a big fan. That one where it's argued that he wasn't. Well, it's about evil, and I just didn't really agree with the argument that was put forward. I think Eichmann was a bigot who knew exactly what he was doing, and enjoyed it, and wasn't a bureaucrat. Well, if he was a bureaucrat, that's not really relevant. I get the whole thing about how doing an industrialized mass murder operation where it is bureaucratic, um, would how do I phrase this? You could sort of dehumanize it through that process, and it could be quite a successful way to butcher large amounts of people. I get why people call attention to that. That sort of that how way bureaucracy is sort of a hands-off, arm's length system where you sort of get numbed to things. And I could see why they did that, and why they set the Holocaust up that way. But it's just not something I'm really interested in knowing about or anything. Well, it's not. I mean, it is kind of the just obeying orders thing. Kind of. There's a bit more to it than that, but sort of. Yeah. Yeah. It's not a total disconnect. of course, the other reason they did something I've brought up a few times is that one of the main reasons they did the Holocaust, the people who ran the Nazi system, wasn't necessarily that they individually as people wanted to wipe out the Jews. It's because they used hatred against the Jews to get into power and whipped up hatred against the Jews to such a level that they were all these people, and they brought in the SS. There were people in the SS who were so frothed up with hatred and so bloodthirsty that they basically had to set them loose. Otherwise, they would have ended up with another SA situation on their hands and had, turned the SS against them. So it's crazy to think about it, but that's basically one of the main reasons why the Holocaust happened, is that they ripped up some of a section of their society into such a mad hatred, such a blind bigotry, that they were so hell bent on butchery and extermination that they had to do it. Otherwise, they risked an insurgency. That's why hatred's bad. Let's see, the reason, one of the reasons I like to talk about that is because the anarchist movement itself can actually learn something from that. Or left-wing revolutionaries in general can learn what not to do from that, because I think that there's a danger in glorifying violence too much. And you can go too far with that, and it can end up like that. It would be different, obviously, in a left-wing scenario. But, it's not about Jews. It's not about the way people are born or anything about them that they can't control. It's about, the people who counter-revolutionary fascists, basically, and the agents of the state, the military. Those are the enemies. It's a totally different enemy set. But you can still take that too far, that glorification of violence thing too far. And, going back to Kaiserreich, funnily enough, the Kaiserreich thing is a funny example of that, because in Kaiserreich, in the history of that game, the French Revolution, how that happened is that the Jacobins, the Leninists, the state socialists, were so furiously, they hated the capitalists and the bourgeois political class so much that they just wanted to go and just butcher them. And so they were the ones who really took control of the war effort. They were the ones who were made up the military. And while they were doing that, the syndicalists just took over control of the government and the economy. Like, they're just like, yeah, you go and do that. You go and kill people, and we'll take over the society and we'll run the society. Yeah, like I'm a big fan of what Malatesta says about violence, is that you're going to need to do some violence. That's just how a revolution is. If you want to really get rid of the status quo, there are people who aren't going to want you to do that, and they have a heavy investment in making that in that not happening. So they're going to do whatever they can do, including whipping up their military and their partisans into becoming violent counter-revolutionaries and all that. And so, there's going to be violence. That's just going to happen. But you have to treat it in such a way that you handle it with sufficient weight, that it's not glorified, that it's something that's a necessity, but it's horrible and it's gross and it just has to be done. And I think that approach, you have to take that approach, otherwise it's going to go too far. And you're going to start putting people on the list who don't actually belong on that list, I think I heard something about the Jordan Peterson saying some dumb stuff about yeah, I think I vaguely recall that. I don't watch Joe Rogan, so I didn't see it, but I think I recall hearing about it like third party. Right, that's a good point. I know an email about the fact that, yeah, the just obeying orders argument doesn't really work when you consider the fact that people who refused to do the atrocities were just replaced and moved around rather than like put in jail. That's a good point. It's so funny that just reading Rhett of Bodom's comment. A totally valid thing to point out, but it's just funny that the way that the language works is that militia, that's the word, and that I guess that is the right word to describe the right wing, anti-government lunatic brigades. But for me, like militias are good things. You know, militias are the best way to do warfare, the least hierarchical, centralized way to do. So it's a good. But then yeah, the people. I have to remember that in the US, militias that's a really bad thing. That's yeah, those right wing militias. Holy crap. See, that's like eventually when I get round to it, once because I don't feel like I've read quite enough yet. Well, anywhere near enough to be honest. I need to read quite a lot more. But I do have some interesting things that I think are interesting to say about the American Nazi movement, the American far right racist movement, the you know the militia element of that, and how that what that traces back to, and how you can sort of there are all these sort of weaving groups where they're sort of the Venn diagrams have a ton of overlap, but they are distinct groups. But like, yeah, it's really interesting, and the militia thing is totally part of that. Oh, conflicting stream. That's always a pain. I wouldn't hold it against you if he's doing music. I've been listening to some left wing music this morning myself. It's only morning. It's only going to be morning for 15 more minutes in this country, but yeah, I was listening because I'm thinking about a segment to add to the video I'm working on because it's kind of working out like it's not going to be as long as I thought. This video that I'm doing, so I might add a bit to it about Dolores Huerta, the Mexican American activist leader who helped set up the United Farm Workers, and how well, I just wanted to mention that there's a ton of corridos, Mexican left wing sort of folk music. There's a lot of corridos written about Dolores Huerta, and like when I say there's a lot of like I'm not that's not like there's a lot. If you like if you put that into YouTube, Dolores Huerta corrido, like there's a lot. It's yeah, I just want, it's a bit in the video that I'm working on about how much women have contributed to the labor movement, and how many women leaders are considered like folk heroes and stuff. Exactly. Yeah, Timothy McVeigh is a great example. It seems like there's a lot of people who don't know that he was a neo-Nazi. They think he was just like an anti-government kook. No, he was a neo-Nazi. He was a Nazi, like full-on Nazi. And yeah, and not just he's actually because he's an example of three movements converging together, not just two. He's an example of the militia movement and the sovereign citizens movement merging with white nationalism, like all three together. you know, Timothy McVeigh didn't have a valid driver's license. He had one he made himself, like a homemade driver's. I think his his partner in the attack was arrested because he had a homemade driver, like a license. What do you call it? A number plate on his car. He didn't have a legal number plate. He had one he made himself or something. If I recall correctly, they were both sovereign citizens anyway. They're involved with the sovereign citizen movement and the militia movement and the white nationalist movement. And they weren't the only ones. There was a lot of people who were in all three groups. They turn up at Aryan Nations meetings and stuff. That's another thing. The Aryan Brotherhood is really famous and well known, and rightly so. They're a very dangerous and massive prison gang. But the Aryan Nations is far more important in terms of the history of like American Nazism. If you really want to understand modern American Nazism, that's one of the places to start. In fact, I would start there. The Aryan Nations group that almost everyone who's who in the sort of 1970s and 80s, which is when modern American Nazism was forming. The ideas were, getting written down. The groups were getting formed. Um, it's not quite a circle, Adam, but it's very close to being a circle. Yeah, like I'm sure there's some non-racists in the militia movement, but not many. sovereign citizens are kind of amusing. Like, it's funny, like, because there's a lot of like clips on YouTube of like the sovereign citizen movement making idiots of themselves in front of police and judges and stuff. And like, I enjoy watching the. I used to enjoy watching those videos, but the problem with them is if you go into the comments, there's like just all wing authoritarians who are like, "Yeah, cops, fucking beat those dipshits up, yeah." And it's like, that's not what I'm getting out of this at all. Fuck them both. Like, yeah, Adam, we're talking about the kind of people who, like, when Timothy McVeigh turned up in his white power t-shirt, which yes, he did own a white power t-shirt, which is one of the reasons why he was kicked out of the military for wearing that. When he would, if he turned up at a party in his white power t-shirt, there wouldn't be anyone who was like, "Get the fuck out of here," even if you're not like a Nazi yourself. The kind of people who wouldn't complain about that. That'd be perfectly normal to see, and then to be around them. That's the kind of group we're talking about. Yeah, that's a good example of Volsticks of what I was talking about before, because the average cop, like, it depends. A lot of cops, if in a revolutionary scenario, would join the move, like the counter-revolutionary movement. They take the side of the status quo, but not all of them. Not all of them. And so I think a lot of them would just stay out of it entirely. I don't think a lot of them would join the revolutionary side, but if or any. But a lot of them would just stay out of it. I think, and so like that's a great example of a group who you wouldn't necessarily just want to put on your revolutionary hit list. Um, until they've decided to. This is like I was saying the same thing about the Nazi movement yesterday in Philip's Line stream. Is that if a revolutionary scenario were to occur at that moment, what would happen to the fascist movement is it would split in two. There would be the half of the fascist movement that are really indoctrinated and really hateful and really willing to put the risk their lives and kill people for fascism, for the ideas, for the movement. But a lot of them would just go home and quit playing. They'd still be bigots, but they wouldn't necessarily want to actively fight against a revolution like with a gun. And so like that's a great way to tell them those types of, because we were talking in the chat about how some fascists can be redeemed. They can be shown how the problems with the ideology and deprogrammed out of bigotry and stuff. And you can see that there's a great example of this where there was a KKK leader who struck up a friendship with a Jewish oh god, what's the word for like Jewish priest? Oh god, my memory is fried. Those people, rabbi. There's a Jewish rabbi who like hate programmed this KKK leader. That stuff. Fine. Um, that's definitely true. That they don't. They're not all people who are gonna need to be killed in a revolutionary scenario. But I think that that in a revolutionary scenario, the ones who don't need to be killed were just going to go home. And so you can tell the two apart. I was just basically making an argument that that distinction, that problem of the fact that not all of them are in it to the end, um, is not a problem in a revolutionary scenario. That they make themselves clear in that case. Now, that's actually one thing I was gonna bring up here on the subject of the Klan. I was gonna. So hold on. I just have to do a bit of computery stuff right now. Damn it. I knew this was going to happen. All right. I have to get it a different way. I'm trying to get this image that I saw recently. I know where I can find it. It's just going to take a sec. Okay. Save image. All right. Now, window share, so you can see what I'm talking about. So, should come up pretty soon. Do. What is going on? Oh, right. I see. It's streaming myself or something. Okay. Oh, crap. It's all gone wrong. All right. Have I done it now? Is it working now? So anyway, the thing I wanted to show you is this meme here. If I have fucked up and you can't see it, because I can't see if you can see it or not, it's a quote from Trump and it's a quote from Goebbels saying similar stuff. But the reason I wanted to point this out is if you look at that Border Patrol flag in the Donald Trump shot, it has a date of establishment on it. It's 1924, right? If you know the history of the Klan, you know that 1924 was the year that they were at their most powerful. That was the absolute pinnacle, the peak of the political power of the Ku Klux Klan in America, right? And they had a huge showing at the Democratic National Convention that year. Because they'd helped push through. They were pro-prohibition, like really in favor of prohibition. Because the far right has always had this weird thing about like purity, which they still have now, where you like don't ingest things and stuff, and stay pure. Like you can see that these days with that kind of silly alt-right thing with the no fap thing, how they're all into that. Well, they're not all into that, but there's a whole thing with that. I find it all very silly. But yeah, that's always been a thing on the far right. Anyway, so they were the Democrats basically owed them for helping get through that legislation, and they were very powerful in the Democratic Party at the time. And they even proposed their own candidate that year. And the reason I wanted to bring this up, other than the fact that the Klan was involved with setting up the Border Patrol Agency, which is, kind of makes sense if you think like, it's not surprising that they were involved in that. I wanted to bring this up because the candidate that they supported at the 1924 DNC was the candidate out of all the most like the candidates that had a chance of actually winning, the popular ones. Out of all of them, the one they supported was the most progressive one. And I think that just says something about liberalism, It's like, yeah, he's progressive, but within reason. Like, the reason they supported him is because the more conservative of the two major candidates was Catholic. And if you know anything about the Klan, they hate Catholics. Absolutely hate Catholics, especially then. They hated Catholics. They still do. But yeah, the 1920s Klan was very anti-Catholic. And the reason for that is actually kind of interesting. Like, so the nativist movement, which is what the Klan kind of came out of. Well, I mean, they came out of the Civil War as well, of course, but the nativist movement in the 19th century was a big deal. And it was Irish they hated because the first wave, the big wave of American immigration into America was from Ireland. And so the Irish had this image of being, if you thought foreigner, you thought Irish, kind of like Muslim is now. And also the Irish were Catholics, and most people, weren't. So they also had their religion and their national origin both came to be sort of intimately tied up with the concept of foreignness. And it's kind of interesting how that role is now filled by Muslims, and it's pretty much exactly the same scenario. Their religion and their country of origin countries of origin in this case, is tied up intimately with the foreignness, with the othering of them. Yeah, it's interesting, and if the Klan had been formed today, like a lot of Nazi groups are being formed today, it'd be Muslims they were most against. Other than the eternal constant of being against Jews for at this point, I think a lot of the far right are against Jews for just like traditional reasons, because that's the far right have traditionally been against Jews for a while. I don't think a lot of them even met a Jewish person, so like or would really have any real reason to hate them. They just do. Buddhists in the 50s. I don't hear anything about that. That's interesting. I mean, there would have been a few Tibetans coming into America in the 50s, because especially towards the end of the 50s. So that was when China was taking over Tibet. Oh, wait, are you talking about something else? Are you talking about prejudice against Buddhists, or Buddhists being prejudiced? I'm not really following. Yeah, I heard that about the Proud Boys, Adam, that they're into this whole no fap thing apparently. Damn it, I said is it A or B? You can't answer yes to that. I don't know what you're saying yes to. Oh, right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like I said, if it was Tibetans, there was a decent amount of Tibetans coming in. I mean, most of them went to India, but because the Americans were giving them arms and stuff, I imagine that quite a few of them did go that way. Unknown email is no centrist. Rand Paul's neighbor. Oh my god, Rand Paul is such a fucking joke. Oh man, I'm just getting more. I get a lot of comments on this video I did about Brexit. It's like by far the most popular thing on this channel, and I don't understand. I mean, I guess I do understand why, because it's Brexit. And everyone watches videos about Brexit, but I didn't make that video intending for them to be like, yeah, this will be the one everyone watches. In fact, if you watch that video, I made it specifically I was communicating information to a specific person, like one individual, and I just wanted to compile a few clips together to show to Jack Saint, because I was talking to him about this, and then I thought, well, if I'm putting these clips together and putting it on my YouTube channel, might as well write a script and like actually say something with it and put forward some arguments and stuff. So I did that, but mainly it was like just so it could be like have a place where those clips I wanted to have assembled were assembled. But yeah, that was the one that blew up, and everyone watches it who isn't subscribed to my channel, just random people, and it's very odd. I think that's one of the things about being mentally ill, is having a severe like personality disorders. You don't want the attention. It's difficult with YouTube, because like a lot of the YouTubers I know, when a video of theirs blows up, it's like yay. But when it happens to me, my first thought is, oh no, oh god, what is this going to mean? How is this going to make me? What is this going to do to me? So yeah, it's worrying, and it's well, actually no, most of the comments on that video are from like right wing people who are sounding like either bigots or idiots, or well, generally both. Yeah, see, that's the thing, is that yeah, the EU is bad and everything, but you got to ask yourself why the leaving is happening and who's in charge of it. And even I don't even mean directly like the Tory politicians who are trying to manage it and what do you call it, negotiate it. I mean like the billionaires, the people who who are sponsoring the whole project. Though if it was being done because Corbyn was in power and Corbyn suggested it, then maybe I'd probably definitely be in favor of that. And if it was being proposed for economic reasons, not for foreigners are bad reasons, then great. But there's more to it than just the EU's good or bad. And I think if you just look at it from that perspective, it's too reductionist to be of any use and can get you into a lot of trouble. I think you got to be a bit nuanced when it comes to that stuff. Food and bread. Bread is food. And yeah, Adam, good luck. Holy crap, that's sounds like a hell of a situation. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's the thing, is that what's going to happen after leaving? Is it going to be a pro worker? Is it going to be a flourishing of the collective of the cooperative movement and worker collectives getting set up? No, that's not going to be what happens. It's going to get further right. Like, even if Labour wins and takes over the government, there's still a lot of people in the country who are going further right, and Brexit, the whole thing has encouraged that and is responsible for quite a bit of that. Not that British society was perfect before Brexit or anything. There's a reason why the movie Children of Men is believable. Britain's had a problem with immigrants for quite a long time. An anti-immigration bigotry issue. Yeah, fishing rights. I've heard that myself. I think there's a lot of people who didn't understand how that works. Not that I'm not that I'm an authority on fishing rights or anything, but I think from what I've heard, there was a few people who misunderstand how like sovereign international waters work and stuff, and that the fact that like fish move around, and that fishing is actually a great example of why regionalism actually is a good idea. If regionalism was done in a socialist fashion, it would be really cool. And fishing, the fact that fish move around from different countries' waters, and that cooperation between the two countries can mean that everyone gets fish. So for example, if fish are going back and forth between Scotland, Scottish waters, and Norwegian waters, or Welsh waters and French waters, or whatever, then if France fishes all the fish, then they won't be able to go back to Welsh water, or the Norwegian. They won't be able to go back to Scott, and so it doesn't, like, the industry. One of the industries is screwed, and so that international cooperation, that regional, which is the idea behind regionalism in the first place, or at least was when regionalism was first being talked about in the early 20th century and the late 19th century. That's why it's a good idea. Um, yes, fish immigrants. Stuart Lee has a good routine where he kind of talks about that sort of stuff. Build that seawall. That's a great thing, because did you know that Donald Trump owns a golfing resort in Scotland, and they have built seawalls to protect against rising sea levels and climate change. So when he argues that he doesn't believe climate change is real, you can rest assured that's a bunch of bullshit, and it's done purely for political reasons. He's protecting his businesses because he knows it's going to happen. Not that he was the one who actually made the decision to build the seawall. That was the guy who he hired to manage that golf resort, who actually decided to do that. It wasn't Donald Trump who was like, we need a seawall, but he didn't like tear it down or anything. He didn't veto the decision. So, yeah, see, it's actually one of the reasons why I'm kind of glad that I've got that Brexit video, even though I get a lot of like horrible comments from right-wing people. Having that, being able to see those comments does also give me some information. One of the things I can safely say is that Bunny in the Box is right, that It's all very vague, and it's all very the stuff they say to support their decision, their stance is very like nebulous and very generic sounding, and like it's just concepts. They're like talking points. It's very vague stuff. And if you actually start getting into specifics and like actual reality, they tend to fall apart. Some I assume are good fish, exactly. Oh, Mercury. Man, I have to fight myself every time anyone brings up Mercury to start going on about Chinese history, because Mercury is kind of important in Chinese history. Comes up a lot. Speaking of that, actually, there's a Total War game coming out set in China, which is like, oh man, it's amazing. It's a pity that I don't like the Total War games. Well, at least I haven't liked them for quite a while. They seem to have stripped out quite a lot of the things I used to like about them. But yeah, I'm gonna be tempted to pick that one up anyway, because there's just not a lot of video games set in Chinese history, and it's like there's three periods that I of Chinese history that I studied in detail, and one of them was the Three Kingdoms period, which is badly named because they weren't kingdoms technically, but that's the term that everyone uses. So, yeah, but the Three Kingdoms period is really fascinating, and it's of course the same era that the Dynasty Warriors games are set in, and because Romance of the Three Kingdoms, the novel, is the most famous and well beloved and mostly widely read of all the Chinese classical historical novels. Yeah, so it's a big deal. It wasn't that long a period. It was 70 years or something, I think, 80 years. But a lot of interesting stuff was happening, and there's a period of a lot of change in China, and a very chaotic and kind of horrible period in a lot of ways. But yeah, it's just you don't see a lot of Chinese video games set in China. So even though I don't like Total War, I might pick it up anyway, just the novelty of it. Though I like strategy games, I don't know, the Total War games, the way that the military the tactical aspect of it is kind of gotten dumbed down. I don't know. I'm probably pretty bad at being able to put this sort of stuff into words. That transliteration you've done there, Terry, that's the outdated form. It's not TZU. It's just ZI or ZI. Sun Tzu. That TZU is that's the old Wade Giles system. So when because Chinese is not written in Latin characters, it's written in a whole different character set. So you've got to transliterate it into English characters, and the way that it generally works is that the early systems for that are really bad, and then they get updated, and that's the outdated version that hasn't been relevant since like the 19th century. So yeah, so the Reds brought up Mao. So yeah, so Mao is Mao Zedong, but it used to be written Si Tung. Yeah, it's like Taoism, how that used to be Taoism, but this is just wrong. It's not. But the one that I always bring up is Peking. There's a lot of people who think Peking is like a different place than Beijing, that it's like a different city, but it's just the old name for that. It's the same place. It's just a completely wrong name for it. It was just totally wrong. And yeah, I mean, it's not like I'm not saying that that's like a racist thing or anything, because I mean, we in English we don't say Paris, we say Paris, even though that's not actually right. And I think in some cases I'm kind of in favor of that, but it always just Peking is so different sounding from Beijing. It's like totally wrong. It's and also the one that I actually on the subject at some point on this channel I was meaning to bring up the fact that there's that really cliche thing about how people who are first language Asian language people, Chinese speakers, Japanese speakers, Korean speakers of the North Asian countries anyway, they tend to mix up R's and L's. Well, there's a reason for that. It's because in Korean, for example, it's the same letter. for R and L, and you use it as an R or as an L in different situations depending on certain rules. If there's two of them in a row, it's LL. If there's one, it's a single R. Stuff like that. When there's vowels on either side of it, I mean. So if it's like A R A, it's Ara. But if it's A L L A, oh, so that's yeah. Anyway, the reason I'm bringing this up is because a lot of people who are English speakers and other European languages like to make fun of this, but they do exactly the same thing with the other way around. So in what we constantly do is we take the letter J in Asian languages and we think it's zhe, Beijing, but it's not. It's Beijing. It's just Jing. It's zhe. And you constantly hear people saying Beijing, and that's not correct. And like it's just so common that it's on the same level to me as the R and L thing. It's no different. So it's like, oh yeah, is it funny? Is it the R and L thing? Yeah, tell me say Beijing. Yeah. So no peeking. Yeah, I'm sure Arabic has its own whole thing. Yeah, I don't know much about that. At one point, I was making an effort to learn Farsi, but a little bit of Farsi anyway. But I found it too difficult. It's a whole. I mean, it's not difficult. It's not the right word. It's such its own thing. It's so internal that in order to get into it, you need to use more of your time and energy that I was willing to use. I guess it's because like Chinese is the same thing. You got to get real deep into that shit because it's so different. Well, in some ways, the Chinese sentence structure is the same as English, so that's helpful. And like Japanese, like my one of my Chinese tutors at university told me that she had a harder time learning Japanese than English because the sentence structure is so different. And even though you could know as many Japanese words as you want, it's just in your brain. It's like it's really hard to get your head around that you're constantly falling into the wrong language pattern and stuff. Whereas she could know not that many words in English, but still be able to know how to construct sentences just naturally. You're a Muslim? Unknown email? I didn't know that. It's interesting. I imagine learning Arabic is pretty important there. Well, that's actually, it's interesting because that's why it's one of the reasons. There's a few reasons, but it's one of the reasons why I never became like a proper academic, like teaching Chinese history at university, because you need to be able to study primary sources. So not only do you need to be able to speak Chinese fluently, you need to be able to read ancient Chinese, like seal script from hundreds and hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago in some cases. And it's like I'm just not naturally good enough at languages to like the amount of time it would take me just to do that part is so massive that if I was naturally good at languages, I'd be more well suited to it. But that was the barrier basically. Like even though I'm fairly knowledgeable about it, most of the stuff I know comes from secondary sources. Yeah, the European languages aren't actually so difficult though, because in a lot of ways they're really similar to English. Like Chinese is like it's a whole thing. It's like such an insular world. How do you get into that? It's like I think the maximum amount of characters I could like when I was really good, well, comparatively to what compared to now. It was about 250 characters. You need 1,500 to read a Chinese newspaper. So I was like way off, way off. And I was impressed with my 250, like that's fuck all though. That's not. Learning languages, I don't find it awesome. I find it really tedious because it's just not I just don't have the right brain for it. Like in Korea, it's satisfying when you get things right, and you see the look in people, especially Koreans who don't, Korean people don't get a lot of don't have a lot of exposure to people, English language people who's coming over and like pronouncing their language well and like saying things well. Um, so it's cool like when say kamsamnida and the person's like, oh yeah, it's really well pronounced. But that's not worth it. I didn't find it that worth it for the just sheer level of work it is. So it's an interesting subject though, because at some point I don't have any direct plans for it. So if I do make a video about this, it'll be a long time away. But I'm really interested in neuroplasticity and how children's brains are so much better at learning languages than adults, and better at a lot of things. And so that's one of the things about the education system is I think the education system needs to try and preserve neuroplasticity as much as possible. I think we're actually hurting it a lot, and that neuroplasticity may stick around for longer in more people if we encourage it rather than have an education system that works against it. So yeah, it's a shame I didn't learn any languages when I was really young, so it would have been easy then. I lived in France for a short time as a child, and so we were dirt poor. I'm not trying to give you the impression I'm some jet setter, but my mother had me when she was quite young, and she was like kind of depressed because she was thinking that now she's not going to be able to do a lot of the things she wanted to do in her life, like travel the world. And then she was like thinking, well, I could still do it. It'd just be kind of I just have this like 3-year-old kid. So she did it anyway with a 3-year-old kid, even though everyone said it would be a terrible idea, and it wasn't. It was awesome. And so I was only 3 when I was living in France, but it did like I spent so much time learning French pronunciation that it really instilled in me a lifelong thing where I value that highly. I try and get French right. Like in videos, if I like come across something Dutch or German, I'll just say it however I think to say it. And if I mangle, I just put in a thing where I'm like, sorry if I mangled that, because I didn't really bother to like look into it. But with French, I always make sure I get it. Try and make sure I get it right. And I actually I cut something out of my last video, just because I didn't say the French part right, and I couldn't be bothered re-recording it. And it wasn't a big deal, important part. So I was just like, I'm gonna cut it. Fuck it. Yeah, yeah. I think part of the reason, well, there's a Eurocentrism aspect to academia anyway, but I think part of the reason, aside from that, as to why historians tend to focus on America and European history and stuff like that is the language part. Is that it's just easier to learn. Like if you're going to become an expert on Dutch history, you need to learn Dutch. That's like you just have to. And it's way easier to learn Dutch than it is to learn like Japanese or Chinese or something, or Arabic. Like so, I think that is part of why. But I also do think there is a Eurocentrism thing as well. People just value that over it. And you get a lot of stuff like I constantly see is when you're doing Chinese history or anything like that, if you're it'd be the same in Arabic history, you constantly see people saying like in the history of the world when all they really mean is the history of Europe. Like this was the first time ever that this happened, and what they really mean is it was the first time it happened in Europe. Because they don't know, of the rest of the world. And they don't know that actually that same exact thing happened in China like 1,000 years before it happened in Europe. So yeah, you just see that constantly, and it really gets on my nerves. I gotta say, like, I'm constantly like feeling I'm commenting that a lot. Like, you mean European history, right? And it's one of the things. It's the same with philosophy. Like philosophy tube, for example, will say like definitive statements about philosophy when actually he just means Western philosophy. Like he'll say like, and Descartes was the first person to ever come up with this idea, and what he means is he was the first person to come up with that idea in Europe. Um, and it sort of ignores Eastern philosophy quite a bit. I understand why, because it's very different, and it's a whole different thing. It's like it's insular in the same way that I'm sure Chinese people feel the same way about European philosophy, Western philosophy, that that it's difficult to crack into if you're from a completely different culture. But yeah, it comes up a lot where, religion is another same exact thing there. In fact, with religion, it's defined in an entirely different manner. There's a lot of people in the West who would say that a religion is something that believes in a god or has beliefs and spiritual beliefs that can't be definitively proven and stuff like that. It's all about faith, for example. Whereas an Eastern person would not define religion that way. In Asian culture, religions are seen as a bit more like the formalized, ritualized aspect of it is more important. Like even if like there's a lot of people who would call themselves Buddhists who don't really know that much about Buddhism, but they know how to observe the Buddhist ritual traditions. Take yeah. China didn't do everything first, but yeah, a lot of things. Well, the one that always comes up is the crossbow because they invented the crossbow like way ages before Europe did, like just massively earlier than Europe did. They invented the wheelbarrow really early on too. A few other things. Yeah, someone's talking about Trevor Noah. Yeah, that time I stopped watching that show and have never watched it since, even for a second, since he did that piece about Antifa where he was being a cringy centrist. I was like, I'm done. This is done. Yeah, fireworks. Yeah, well, that's the thing is that the Chinese didn't really think of using gunpowder as a weapon, or they did a little bit, but not much. And the compass. I haven't read Edward Said, but I know that Chomsky is an admirer of his. My voice just cracked. If I recall correctly, I think Chomsky is an admirer of his. Yeah, Asian religion. So I guess yeah, like for it to be a religion in Asia, you don't really need to have any specific belief sets or necessarily require faith from your adherents. It's not really about that. There is that, there's a lot of religions in Asia that have faith and have belief sets and stuff, but that's not what it's defined around. The plow, I mean, I haven't heard that one specifically, but it wouldn't surprise me. Agriculture was the area that they did most of their early innovations. And yes, they invented paper. Yeah, of course. Yeah, Orientalism. That's the one that everyone always brings up. I saw an interview with Said, I think, a long time ago where he was discussing the book, and it sounded interesting. It came up when I was at university. People referenced it, but I never read it. Didn't read many books in general. There were a few, but mostly it was not books. It was journals and little scraps of excerpts and the official Chinese historical imperial records and stuff. There wasn't a lot of books. I think just don't think there is many English language books that have been written on specific stuff, and some of them are just totally false. Like 1421 is the one that everyone. If you mention the book 1421 in a like sinological department at a university, you'll get a lot of eye rolling. It said that book is just completely full of shit. Well, basically, its timeline is correct up to a certain point, and then it just goes out into complete fictional tangent. Like, yeah, it's my my professor used to just rave on about how terrible that book was at length sometimes. Not during class, but like if you hung out after class and stuff. Wait, who was friends with Voltaire? Voltaire is interesting, but a bit misogynistic. Well, quite a lot misogynistic. Reading is, yeah. Well, I mean, I do think that it's not unreasonable to get your theory a different way. There's people with dyslexia. There's people who don't have enough time to read a lot of stuff. So that's the thing. I've brought this up a couple of times. Is that one of the things about the capitalist, wage slavery system is that the workers don't have enough time at the end of a long shift. They're tired. They don't want to like get involved in like reading a bunch of political philosophy and anarchist theory and stuff. They want to like watch blob out on the couch and watch TV. Like it's so 1421. The basic thesis of the book is that actually the Chinese went around the world discovering everything before anyone else did. They discovered North America and all this other stuff. That's basically it's because in the Ming Dynasty there was a guy called Zhong He, if I remember his name correctly. I could be wrong, but I think that was his name. He was a Mongol or a Manchu, a eunuch, and he was like the admiral. Basically, he had the thing called the treasure fleet, which was expensive, exploration ships. And at the time, the Ming Dynasty was very interested in exploring and trading with people and whatnot. And it was in a quite colonial phase of Chinese imperialism. Normally, because if you think of the difference between imperialism and colonialism, at least to me, and this is the way I was taught it at university. I don't know if everyone else uses these definitions or not, but for me, like the way I understand it is that imperialism, all colonialism is imperialism as well, not all, but if it's an imperial outfit that's doing the colonialism, it's also imperialist. But if you're annexing your neighbor, your physical neighbor, next to you geographically, that's imperialistic, but it's not colonial. If you're annexing a country on the other side of the world where it's a completely different culture and you're just totally foreign to them, that's colonialism. And like, at least in Chinese case, they did a lot of imperialism, but not a lot of colonialism. Normally they just expanded out physically, geographically on land to encompass more of what we call China today. They started out on the coast and they moved further, and like America, they moved further and further inland until they reached the desert, and then they kept going further and further after that. And so, yeah, that's what China was mostly like. But there was a time when they were actually doing colonialist stuff. They set up a trading port in Malacca, which is in Malaysia, which was a huge deal at the time. Yeah. Yeah, dyslexia. So it's a difficult thing. Like Anarcho Pack, she's dyslexic, and she's talked to me about how she has a goal where she wants to read. Well, one of her potential goals is to read every bit of anarchist theory that's ever been written, basically. And because there's actually relatively small amount of that, and anarchist theory tends to be short for a bunch of reasons, fairly short. It's possible that you could read every single thing that's ever been written if you dedicated yourself to it, but dyslexia makes it difficult. And it's not like there's going to be audio versions made of every bit of anarchist theory that's ever been written. Fuck all of it is ever going to get audiobooks. Oh, but you do move there as well in imperialism, though. Like if you look at like the European imperial powers, they would talk. Oh, sorry. They would not only would attack their neighbors and invade them and conquer them militarily, they would also bring in their people to occupy. They would move them in, and in many cases until they outnumbered the local population. China did do a lot of that. That was that was a big thing that they did. Like when they took over Tibet, They just moved tons of ethnic Chinese, Han Chinese people into Tibet until they outnumbered the Tibetans. That was their tactic. Well, I don't know how much more there is to say about it, Volstick. So he had the thesis of the book is that China like was secretly discovered everything, but it ignores what really happened in Chinese history, which is that so it's been there's been 10 years since I studied this stuff, so forgive me if I get anything wrong, but basically there was a big change in government policy during the Ming Dynasty. What happened was at the start of it, they were very expansionist. They were very trade focused. They were setting up trading ports in various places around the world. They were doing a lot of shipping. They were exporting a lot of stuff, importing a lot of stuff. And then suddenly they just changed and became isolationist. And the story goes that the emperor, the new emperor, had just built a new palace to live in. And the first night he moved in, it got struck by lightning. And in Chinese history, that kind of stuff is really important. It's called the mandate of heaven, right? What happens is the emperors gain their authority over people. They justify their authority by the idea that the gods, the supernatural entities in Chinese mythology, basically are cool with him. They give him their blessing, that he's got their backing. That's what the imperial power is based on. And if you get struck by lightning, that's kind of like proof that you don't have the mandate of heaven. So it's really bad. No, you should definitely not read the book. You should read a book about the book, maybe, but don't read the book itself. It's a waste of time. Um, yeah. So anyway, so basically, the Ming Dynasty, around the time where they were supposed to be discovering everything, apparently, they were actually becoming heavily isolationist and going the other way. And they didn't do all that stuff, basically. The isolationist policy is something I brought up in my Brexit video, although in that video I was mainly talking about the Qing dynasty, who took the isolationist stuff even further to the point where China was like a joke. And it's really sad too, because the dynasty I mainly studied was the Tang, which is considered by many people as the very height of the cultural influence of the Chinese empire. It was when they were at their peak in every way. And that's when all the really great Chinese poets were knocking about. Some of those guys, just great. There's my favorite Chinese poem is about how a guy wrote about how he got so drunk he fell off his horse and injured himself. It's awesome. Anyway, I just love that kind of stuff. Really chill stuff. He wrote another great poem about the moon, how the moon's awesome. Anyway, a total tangent. Anyway, yeah. So the Tang Dynasty was really cool and was the like height of China, and China was so awesome. And then 1,000 years later, just a total joke, backwater. It's sad. Yeah, Conquest of Bread. See, that's the kind of book that's likely to have a lot of audio versions knocking around. But that's when it comes to anarchist theory, it's not exactly obscure. There's a lot of stuff that's just so obscure that if you want to consume it, you're going to have to track it down and read it. There's no other way. I listen to a lot of audiobooks because when I'm walking around, it's kind of I actually used to do that when I was younger. I used to walk around with a book, just reading a book while I was walking around the street, and it's kind of dangerous. Like it's a bit irresponsible to do that. Well, yeah. So the Manchurians used the disarray that the Chinese Empire was in as as a they could as a they invaded. They took the opportunity to invade. Um. So yeah, but it also like the the country just got carved up by the Western powers. It was just a little pocket. That's why the Hong Kong ended up with the British, and someone was it the French controlled. It might have been the British actually controlled Shanghai. The Germans had a little area they controlled. I hear the German one was the most racist one. Not surprising. Sorry, I shouldn't be mean, but yeah, that is true though. I did hear that. Um, Karl Marx wrote Das Kapital before he read it. It's kind of amusing. Yeah, I guess maybe the reason I associate colonialism with being over the other side of the world is just because of how it shaked out in Europe. Like for me, like when I imagine colonialism, there's always boats involved. There's always ships, And the Chinese didn't do that much of that. They did a shitload of doing it over land, though, to their immediate neighbors. See, that's one of the things that I like about this upcoming game, the Paradox game, Rome Imperator or Imperator Rome, is that it's like the world. If you look at what the map of Europe was like at the time, there's just so many little. It looks like it kind of to me. It looks like what if Europe went more like anarchist? Was because it looks like a federalized system where France is broken up into about 500 different little, well, not 500, but like 100 different little countries. And Italy is like 30 different little countries, and it's just kind of cool. But yeah, that's what China looked like originally too, and then it just all became one. And it really wasn't until the Qing dynasty that every part of it was everything that we consider China today. It was actually pretty recently that a lot of that stuff became China. There's a lot of books on anarchism I would recommend. I mean, I just did a 3-hour long video series about anarcho-syndicalism theory and practice by Rudolf Rocker. Certainly recommend that. I recommend anything Emma Goldman wrote. I'd recommend the pamphlet Anarchy by Malatesta. What do I know about the Tiananmen Square massacre? About the massacre itself, I mean, I read about it, but I don't still have that stuff in my head really. But what I do have in my head still is the sort of more background stuff about it, like about the student movement that spawned it and why that student movement didn't lead to a wider movement across the whole country in all walks of life. Basically, the peasant class didn't pick up the fight, and that's because the communists in China, the CPC, they have a really interesting system where it's insidious, but they separate rural and urban people to such a degree that a whole movement can spring up among the urban population that the rural population barely even know exists. They won't hear about it. And that's what happened with that. It was a major student movement that existed in multiple large Chinese cities, but just never got picked up by the peasants because they never really heard about it. And it's probably harder these days to do that in the internet era, even in China, but it was possible to do that in 1989. And it's kind of insidious the way that the government control it. Basically, it's a really interesting case of how the state can control information to manipulate the public. Yeah, see, the actual cause of the student movement itself is something I don't remember, but I do remember that it was not just in Beijing. It was in a bunch of cities, and they crushed it, and the peasant class just never. Well, most of them just never even knew it existed. And the ones that did, because there was such a divide between rural and urban, there would have been just, and that divide totally continues to this day, by the way. They'll be thinking, well, that doesn't affect me. Why should I care? I've got it good. Because the communists were always favored the rural population. Because that goes back to the Chinese Civil War and how that played out. Basically, in the Chinese Civil War, the Republicans, the nationalists, the right wingers, basically controlled most of the big cities, but the communists controlled like the entire countryside. And in China, as in most places, controlling the whole countryside is more of an advantage than controlling the cities, because you just the sheer level of resources you control, and so that's part of why they won. And to this day, the government has always had a closer connection to the rural population than to the urban population. That wouldn't surprise me at all because one of the in any country like in China or Russia, in Soviet Russia, the movements to overthrow those regimes were a real interesting mix of liberals who, I referred to as radical liberals in my at some point in my video where I was defining what radical means. Yeah, where I said, if you're in a society that's not a liberal democracy, it's very different from a liberal democracy, and you want to change it to a liberal democracy, that's a radical position because that's a massive change to society. So you can be a radical liberal, and so those movements were sort of heavily divided between those liberals and the like the further left, the leftists, the socialists, and people who wanted to, like, there's a lot of people who wanted to overthrow the Soviet regime with an actually socialist society, one that was really socialist, but that didn't gain a lot of traction because people were just sick of that word. People were sick of that whole thing, so they just wanted to go to liberalism. Yeah, I don't know. I assume SRG, you're sort of comparing that China thing to America. I don't know if necessarily the American situation is the same though, because in America, there's kind of like a north and south divide as well, and that's part of it. That's not that's not the case in China. There's no well, I mean, in China, the real if you're going to like talk about the stereotypical Hicks, they're mostly from the north. South China is China's industrial base, so there's a lot of like really poor people in South China, but they don't have that reputation of like poor redneck kind of people that yeah, so I think in America's case, there is an element of that, of rural versus urban, but I think there's an even bigger element of regional areas as well. Well, thank you. Yeah, I'm sure it is getting pretty late. I'll end this at 1 because that'll be 3 hours, or just past 1 because I didn't start on time. It is almost like the state is bad, Jonathan. Boots Riley deleted his Twitter account. That's sad. And I'm not on Twitter, and I never will go on there again. I've decided I'm completely done with it. Oh, I no, I said if they ever delete Donald Trump's Twitter account, I'll go back on. And the reason I say that is because I know they won't. So it's just basically a way that I can say I'll never go back. In the really, 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 really old times of Chinese history, there was a north and south divide. Because what we call China now started in the north, that culture. And they, at some point, in prehistory times, in pre-writing stuff down times, the North launched a massive invasion of the South and took over the entire South. And ever since then, it's been that area of North and South has been what's historical China. But the reason I really bring this up because the reason the North invaded the South is for kind of an amazing reason, because what they were eating in northern China at the time, what they how different cultures have like a different staple food. Like in Ireland, there's classically, famously potatoes, and in Italy, it's pasta, and in Japan and most of it in India, it's rice. Well, in North China, what they were eating was millet. It's like the stuff we feed birds today. It's bird seed, bird feed, basically, is what they're eating, and it's horrible. And South China had rice, so they were like, "We need that." So they basically launched one of the largest like cultural invasions in the history of the world just so they could get rice, which I think is kind of funny. I'm sure the people who would died in the wouldn't have found it amusing, but yeah, certainly wouldn't want to eat fucking millet every day. That's for sure. Oh yeah, right. Well, I've got I believe my there's an email on my about page. I think. Yeah, pretty sure. I've had emails through it, so there must be. Yeah. So you can email me. I'm not like massively good with email. You're probably not going to get a prompt response, but you'll get some. Yes, that's a good point, Jonathan. There's an east and west divide in America too. That's well, there's a coastal and a non-coastal divide. Yeah, that's an interesting argument, Terry. That could be an argument for that British food is really boring and plain, and that India had spices. I believe there was a health concern as well. Like spices would it's kind of like alcohol. You know how people used to drink alcohol because the water hadn't been treated and they had no purifying system, so it was safer to drink alcohol that had been distilled. I think there might be a similar thing there, food wise as well, with spices. But yeah, I just wanted to quickly jump back to when I was talking about the Border Patrol agency and how they were set up by the KKK. Well, it's funny that because like at the time that idea was happening, that was like it's I'm sure the left was massively opposed to that at the time, right? And probably a lot of people were opposed to setting up the Border Patrol agency because it was the KKK who wanted to do it. Well, they were one of the groups pushing for it. I should say. I talk like it was 100% them. It wasn't 100% them, but they were at the height of their power at the time, and that's not a coincidence. That was when the Border Patrol agency became a thing. Um, but it's just interesting now. You fast forward to today, and everyone except like the far left considers the Border Patrol agency just a fact of life. It's just normal. It's funny how that works. At the time, it was considered like a sort of a Nazi thing to do. It was a sort of fascist, like a far right idea, and yeah, now it's just the status quo. And it's going to be the same thing with ICE. The only reason why so many liberals are opposed to ICE is because ICE is pretty new. It hasn't had that time to become normal yet. There's a lot of state institutions and corporate institutions who are completely nefarious and have a completely negative impact on society and don't really help anyone or anything, but they're just like normal. Came into contact with yeah, there's a lot of stuff like that. There's a lot of stuff that grow in North America and wasn't around the rest of the world and that we only know about because of that. um yeah, it's a surprising number of things. Tobacco is one of the obvious ones, but chili, a lot of spices. The funny thing is we associate chili, and by chili I don't mean the country, of course, I mean the spice, um, with Asian cooking, but they've only had it for the last 500 years. They only had it since they got it from America. And the whole curry thing, like, it depends how you define curry. I mean, I guess most people would define curry as like a dish with is rice, meat, and some kind of gravy or sauce. Those three things. Well, that wasn't necessarily how people ate in India back in the day. Pre-colonial era. Well, first of all, India wasn't one country. It was like 16 different countries, and would never have become one country if not for British colonialism. That's the only reason why it's one state. Well, it's not one, and it's Pakistan too, I guess. But yeah, it was not. It was never considered to be one culture, one country, and it's not naturally doesn't really fit together that well as a country. Um, but anyway, they mainly they ate like they have tandoor, where they put spices on meat and they cook it in a special oven, and they serve that with rice, and there was spiced meat. They didn't really have the sauce part. Well, they did in some parts of India. But that wasn't the norm. But it's the norm in terms of Bangladesh. Good point. I always forget Bangladesh, which is actually really embarrassing because in the video I'm working on, let's have the segment about Bangladesh in that video. Anyway, it was in England, in Britain, where that curry, as we know it today, really was formulated. It was done by Indian people who lived there. It wasn't like white people who did it, but in some cases, it was white people who were the reason for it. For example, the famous story, and we were taught this story in Asian studies class at university, is that in Glasgow, I believe it was Glasgow, uh, a bus driver comes into a restaurant, an Indian restaurant, and he wants something with gravy, and none of the dishes have it. So he asks for if they have something with gravy, and the chef basically throws some tandoor meat into a pan and just puts some yogurt in there, some tomato, whatever, and he invents chicken tikka masala, which means chicken tikka, spiced meats cooked in a tandoor oven, masala, which is sauce. It's just the traditional way of eating meat with sauce. That's literally what it means. And then there's a dish called balti, another curry that was invented in Birmingham. And in Asian studies class, they use the term Birmingham style Indian food to describe what we call Indian food. They call it Birmingham style. Yeah, butter chicken wasn't one of the ones that came out of this. I remember that. It was korma, balti, madras, chicken tikka masala, those kinds of things. It's interesting we were talking about Chinese as inventors before, because the other country that comes to my mind when I think of countries that have invented a lot of stuff is Scotland. The Scottish have invented tons of stuff. It's actually really kind of surprising. I mean, I'm not. I shouldn't say that. It sounds kind of mean. It's not surprising. It's interesting. The other thing, because I went through a period where I learned a lot about Scottish. I studied Scottish history for a while, and the two things I was surprised about is how capitalist Scottish people are. Like, holy shit! Like a lot of the really horrible colonial stuff that happened in like the Caribbean, those Scottish dudes. Hey, Gwen. Yes, French toast is not remotely French. French fries also aren't remotely French. They're called French fries, I believe, because they're cut in a French style, but they like the particular shape is a French cut, but they didn't actually do it. Yeah, Adam Smith was Scottish. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. I'm currently rewatching a show that I love, that not that many people know about. It's really quite left wing, and I would actually go as far as to call it anarchist, but not knowingly, more like accidentally anarchist, because it has anti-capitalist and anti-government themes. When I say government, I mean the stuff we would call the state, intelligence apparatus, things like that, and cops. Um, it's not fond of cops. It's not fond of the intelligence agencies, and it's very not fond of capitalism. It's called La Casa de Papel, or in English, they decided to call it Paper Money Heist, even though that's not a translation of the Spanish title, which is House of Paper. I believe they didn't want to call it House of Paper because of House of Cards, which I think was a dumb decision. People can tell the difference between House of Paper and House of Cards. Anyway, yeah, it's a really good show. It's about a heist. It's really entertaining. And I'm rewatching it at the moment, so it's on my mind. That's why I was thinking of the corridos thing that I was referring to earlier about Dolores Huerta, because corridos it's a Mexican thing, but it's quite popular in Spain. Well, it's popular in Spain among musicians. There's a scene in La Casa de Papel where they're talking to the there's two musicians in the group of heist people, heisters, heisties. Yeah. They're musicians as well as being criminals, as well as being robbers, and they're educating the other heisters about corridos, about Mexican folk music, and they sing one, and it's just a fun scene. But yeah, freedom fries. That was the kind of thing in the Bush era. There was a lot of people around the world making fun of America, and that was one of the things that we made fun of. Freedom fries. I'm sure there was a lot of people in America who were making fun of that as well, of course. But yeah, that was it's funny, the Bush era, because it looks kind of quaint now in some ways. But yeah. Oh, hold on. Sorry, I'm getting distracted. Customer was pretty good. Professor talks about rich people getting huge profits. Yeah, it is left wing. It's got that problem that some left wing stuff has, where their solution is that money's bad. Their solution is, let's get us a whole bunch of it, and that, I don't really think that's the answer. It's like, isn't it bad how some people have so much money? Let's become them. That's not the answer. But it's a bank robbery show. What else? They're gonna be stealing lots of money. That's the point. So yeah, yeah, that's what I was gonna. Sorry, Rhett. But yeah, that was what I was gonna bring up. I got distracted. Is that the Trump regime, while it is in many ways more mockable and worse than the Bush administration in foreign policy terms, it doesn't get that much worse than the Bush administration. I mean, the wars, the amount of people that died, the lies that were told to get into that war. I think it's easy to overlook, like to play down that stuff when you talk about how much worse Trump is than Bush. He's dumber than Bush, and he's speaking worse. His public speaking is just atrocious, and Bush's was terrible. So it's hard to be worse. But yeah. Yeah, illegalism is good. It's a funny thing though, because like, I was in Captain Andy, one of Captain Andy's videos, he did about voting, anarchists voting, is that he was responding to something ContraPoint said, where ContraPoints was like, when I talk to revolutionaries, they always seem to, not when I talk to them, when I see what revolutionaries say, they don't seem to have concrete plans for what to do for the revolution. It's all very vague and like generic, and they haven't really thought it through. And then, Andy points out that, dude, it's illegalism. You can't just openly talk about it in specific detail online. Like, that would be really dangerous and stupid to do. That's just going to end up, that's inviting material to end up being played at your trial, as Thought Slime would say. Like, there's a reason why you don't go into detail about it. It's not because we haven't thought it through. It's because it's illegal. It's very illegal. Like, it's the most illegal thing in liberal democracy, basically. So yeah, you don't just go into detail about it online. So makes it difficult though, because I got a lot of stuff to say about that, but I can't. You're just gonna have to imagine it. Captain Andy, if you go to my voice cracked again. I think I'm losing my voice. Well, I'm gonna be ending in a few minutes anyway. If you go to the main page of my channel, he's in my comrades list, my friendly channels list. Yeah, I know. Criminal anarchy is literally a crime. It's a state crime, not a federal crime, but it's a crime in a lot of states. Criminal anarchy, yeah. Yeah, see, that was the thing. I thought Trump would be a lot worse on foreign policy, military stuff, because of what that Yemen thing that happened right when he took over. But that was actually a holdover from Obama. Obama said no to it, but it was planned during his term. So, and I can see why, because he was saying yes to a lot of stuff. Yeah, I think that seems like it was maybe more of an Obama thing, because he hasn't done a lot of that. I don't think Trump really, because Trump isn't such a nativist and an isolationist. I don't think he cares about the rest of the world. I don't think it's that. He just doesn't. he will put tariffs on imports to try and but he doesn't think about it in terms of like the fact that they can put tariffs on your shit too, and that's of course what they're going to do. Even countries that would never think of putting tariffs on US products are going to do that. If you, it's just so short sighted, but he just doesn't think about other countries. So I think that's why he is like that. It's because of his ideology. It's because he's such a nativist. Whereas, yeah, that's true about ISIS. If you look at Bush, the reason why that all that shit happened with him is because he was surrounded by neocons. I don't think it's fair to say he was a neocon himself because I don't think he understood the ideology in a sophisticated enough way to make that claim. But that they were neocons. Their whole ideology is centered around global, geopolitical strategy and all that kind of shit. They've got these high-minded ideas about all that kind of stuff. And they're totally wrong about all of it, of course, and their ideas are terrible. But Trump's ideology, that stuff's not part of it. He doesn't think like that. He just doesn't think. Yeah, that's a lot of the time. I think that is pretty fair to say. I mean, this is a person who called his wife Melanie in a tweet once. He's not big on getting shit right, and yeah, the 3 Mexican countries. Yeah, that was a funny thing. It was weird. Liberty cabbage. Right, sauerkraut. Yeah, it's just like the whole Alsatian thing. Yeah, because Alsace-Lorraine was taken over by different people at different times. So the dogs were either called Alsatians or German Shepherds, depending on who controlled Alsace-Lorraine, or at least Alsace specifically. Yeah, I actually lost my voice the other day, and I hadn't even been talking that much, so I'm a bit. I don't really know what that's about. Yeah, Kroivik's comparing Trump to Hillary. Yeah, see, there was a lot of people, especially on the far left, who were fear mongering something like a lot about Hillary Clinton and how her foreign policy was going to be really bad and would end up in a war with Russia and stuff. I think that was all total garbage. I think she would have been exactly like Obama. Which would have made things worse, but in a slow, incremental way, just like Obama did. I don't think Hillary getting into power would be this like apocalyptic thing in foreign policy at all. And I don't know whether Trump's is better than what hers was going to be, would have been. It's impossible to know. But yeah, it's silly to think, we got to get this Trump guy in because his foreign policy won't involve war with Russia, whereas Hillary's will. That was just dumb. That was dumb as hell. And then, Chomsky was one of the people who said that stuff. John Pilger said that stuff. A lot of people on the far left, a lot of the prominent thought leader people were just going on about how Hillary was going to be terrible for, NATO reasons and all this stuff. Yeah. Well, it depends, Terry, when the global nuclear war happens. Because the capitalists don't want global nuclear war to happen right now, obviously. That would be terrible. But if it happens in 20 years, that's all right. Short-term profits now, as I, said in one of my rocker videos, it's all about the next fucking fiscal quarter. That's if they can get some profits for the next fiscal quarter out of fucking nuclear war, then they will encourage nuclear war. But I think that's the way a lot of bankers thought about the global financial collapse, that a lot of them were like, yeah, this is going to cause something really bad to happen. We can see that through our numbers. But all that really matters is we executives get our pay packet, get our $30 million bonus or whatever, and then get the fuck out of town. That's all they cared about. They wanted to use the bubble, the housing bubble, to get themselves rich even regardless of what happened to the economy. Because if the economy tanks and you've got $80 million in the bank, you're fine. The economy, well, if the economy really, really tanks, then you're fucked. But if it, it didn't tank to that level in 2008, 2009. It didn't. So those people were totally fine, and they still are. And that it just seems to me they did that knowingly. They were like, "Yep, let's fuck up the economy, get out, so we won't be affected by the fucked up economy, and in the long run, we'll be set for life." Yeah, to a certain extent, in some ways, it doesn't matter who wins U.S. elections. I said somewhere at some point. I get confused as to where I said things. I've said a lot of things in various formats, but I mentioned at one point that no matter who wins the U.S. Oh, actually, no, it wasn't me who said that. There was a post by the IWW that I quoted. So no, it wasn't. This wasn't my original thought. This was someone at IWW. Well, it's one of the people who runs one of their social media accounts, who said, no matter who wins in a US election, the people always lose. And that is true. Absolutely. See, that's kind of what I mean, Jonathan, is that I'm not going to tell you off for doing a guillotine reference towards bankers. Totally get it. Not going to call that out at all. Totally fine. However, I don't think those are the kinds of people who actually will go beyond the block in a revolutionary context. You just need to take their money away and take their resources away, and then they'll go away, and they don't have any power about, beyond that. They're not ideologues in the same way that like a Nazi is. So like, yeah, in reality, most of those people won't need to be killed. There won't need to be any violence towards any of them. But yeah, take their resources. It's like the way I look at it is like in the film industry, because that's where one of my knowledge areas is that there's a lot of actors and directors and producers who have tons of money, and we don't want to stop them from making movies and being famous and having having a social presence and being kind of thought of as a bit of a leader or some public figure, being having influential things they say carrying weight and appearing on talk shows and all that shit. That's all fine. But when they go home, they're not going to be going home to a house with 6 BMWs and a fucking massive mansion. They're just going to be going home to a normal, regular house like anyone else. That's the difference, is that we don't want to. Yeah, no, I get that, Jonathan. I know. That's why I wouldn't tell you off for it, because that's what vent. You need to vent that way as a left-wing person. We all do. God, I indulge in a ton of that stuff myself. But I brought it up because I was talking about that earlier in the stream about, the kinds of the way that violence works in a revolutionary context. So it's just relevant to what I was talking about. Normally, I would just completely let that go. I would never have commented on that at all otherwise. It's just normal stuff to me. And yeah, landlords. See, that's a great, people have that, ACAB. I say ALAB sometimes. All landlords are bastards. Same thing. It's a job that shouldn't exist. Yeah, I think with the rich people in a revolutionary context, the key thing isn't whether they live or die. It's to stop them from leaving the country with their stuff. That's what they're going to want to do. They're going to want to gather all their shit, other than real estate, which they can't take with them, and just get out of the country, go to wherever the ruling elite are fleeing to. So that's where you've got to stop. You've got to stop them from taking shit out of your country. So you can flee, but you're fleeing with the clothes on your back. Fuck you. There is a lot of like historical revenge stuff in the left, I have to admit. That's why I love Kaiserreich so much. It's wish fulfillment. It's like, yeah, the syndicalist movement was really popular around that time, and it could have become this if the right context. Capital flight, see the actual just like money in a bank account, that's not really that important because that doesn't mean anything in an anarchist society. But if they want to take like cars and stuff, physical stuff, we can't let that happen. In terms of like physical money, I don't like electronic money. I don't think that matters. They can take whatever they want. In an anarchist economy, it's resource based. You want to keep them all of the means of production in your country. Basically, that's what you. And you might think, well, how can means of production flee the country? That doesn't make any sense. But that totally can happen. If you look at World War II, for example, going back to China again, there was a great thing. This is actually from the book Wild Swans. This isn't even something I learned at university. I read Wild Swans well before I went to university. But in Wild Swans, they talk about the writer talks about how in Manchuria, which is where they were living at the time, she talks about the last 10 days of World War II and how chaotic it was in that area, and how in Manchuria, in the last 10 days, it was controlled by like 4 or 5 different groups at different times. So like first these people came in and they controlled the area, and then their enemies were on the door at the doorstep, so they bailed, and then the enemies came in and took it over. Like, so the nationalists were in control at one point, and then they had to flee because the communists were on their tail. Then the communists came in, and then at one point the Soviets were in charge of that area, but they bailed. But the reason I'm bringing this up is because when the Soviets were in charge and they left, they actually broke down a lot of Manchurian factories and just brought the factories with them back to Russia. They like broke down entire factories and shipped the whole factory back to Russia. So it's possible to actually like ship the means of production, at least part of it, out of the country. And that's kind of what I'm talking about. Like that, you got to stop that. Yeah, yeah, it was a really crazy time. I remember reading something about how the nationalists were running out of shoes. That was one of their resource deficiency problems is shoes, like for their soldiers. They're like barefoot soldiers. But yeah, there is a sort of a revenge element. I will admit that, definitely, at least the way I think about it. But with the fascists. This is for Spain. It's like I wasn't even there. Fuck you. Hmm. Anyway, it's been 3 hours now. I should probably wrap this up. But it's been nice. It's been nice. I've never done this kind of live stream before, and I enjoyed it. I wasn't sure how it was going to go. Probably I should try and do a game next time, at least for part of it. But I just didn't quite feel. I planned to do a particular game, and then that kind of fell apart at the last minute. And then this other game I thought of at the last minute, I just haven't really played it enough yet. But yeah, we'll see. All right, everyone. Well, thank you very much for watching and chatting. It's been great, and I'll catch you all next time. See ya.